Victoria Hale had 48 hours to find a husband, or lose everything her grandmother built. The boardroom vultures were circling. The hidden clause in the company trust was clear: unmarried at 40 and control transfers to a committee she doesn't choose. Her rival had planned this for years. Then Ethan Brooks, her quiet, widowed financial analyst, made a joke at her birthday party that changed both their lives forever. "Guess I should marry you," he said. She didn't laugh. "Come with me tonight. Bring a ring." What began as desperation became something neither expected, and a corporate war neither could lose. If you want to know how a single father's spreadsheet skills exposed a billion-dollar conspiracy, stay with me until the end. Hit like, and comment which city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The rain started exactly at 6:14. Ethan Brooks noticed because he noticed everything: numbers, patterns, the way light shifted through office windows at different times of day. He'd been watching the clouds gather since lunch, calculating whether he'd make it to the Riverside Montessori before the storm hit. Now, standing in the underground parking garage of Hale Industries headquarters, he accepted defeat. The sky had beaten him by 3 minutes. His phone buzzed. Maya, his daughter's after-school teacher, sending a photo. A 5-year-old girl with her father's serious eyes, wearing a paper crown and holding a crayon drawing of what appeared to be either a horse or a very ambitious dog. "She's fine," the text read. "Take your time. We're doing finger painting." Ethan smiled, a rare expression that softened the sharp angles of his face. At 34, he looked older than his years, worn smooth by grief and responsibility rather than aged by them. The loss of his wife 3 years ago had carved something permanent into his features, but it wasn't sadness exactly. More like vigilance. The constant alertness of someone who knew how quickly the world could change. He pocketed his phone and unlocked his Honda Civic, a sensible car for a sensible man, though the booster seat in the back told a more complicated story. The engine turned over on the first try, which was something. Last month's repair bill had been substantial, but Maya needed reliable transportation to her therapist appointments, her swimming lessons, the carefully constructed routine that kept a little girl's world stable. The rain hammered against the windshield as he pulled out of the garage. Thursday evening traffic crawled along the wet streets, brake lights smearing into red rivers. Ethan didn't mind. He used the time to think. The quarterly report sat in his briefcase, 47 pages of analysis that had kept him at his desk until midnight for the past 2 weeks. Victoria Hale had requested it personally, which was unusual. The CEO of a company this size rarely dealt directly with mid-level financial analysts. But the numbers were troubling, and Ethan had learned long ago that troubling numbers eventually found their way to the top. Something was wrong with the Eastern European distribution contracts. The patterns didn't match. Shipping costs had increased by 32% while delivery times improved, which made no logical sense. Fuel prices were down, labor costs stable. The math should have gone the other direction. He'd flagged it in his report, highlighted in yellow on page 23. Whether anyone would read that far remained to be seen. His phone rang through the car's Bluetooth. The caller ID made him frown. "Mr. Brooks?" A woman's voice, crisp and professional. "This is Amanda Chen, Ms. Hale's executive assistant. Are you available to speak?" "I'm driving, but yes." Ms. Hale would like the quarterly analysis delivered to her personal residence this evening. She's hosting a small gathering and prefers to review the document before Monday's board meeting. Ethan glanced at the dashboard clock. 6:28. Maya's bedtime was 8:30, and he still needed to cook dinner, review her homework, read the required 3 chapters of Charlotte's Web. "Could I send it electronically? The report is fully formatted." Ms. Hale specifically requested a physical copy. A pause. "She mentioned your name directly, Mr. Brooks. I believe she wants to discuss the findings." His hands tightened on the steering wheel. A direct summons from Victoria Hale wasn't something you declined, not if you wanted to keep your job, not if you had a daughter depending on that job. "I'll need to make arrangements for my daughter." "Of course. The address is being sent to your phone now. Ms. Hale appreciates your flexibility." The call ended. Ethan stared at the rain-blurred road and felt the familiar weight settle in his chest. The constant negotiation between responsibility and reality that defined single parenthood. He called the Montessori first. Maya's teacher answered on the second ring, her voice warm with the practiced patience of someone who spent her days with small children. Extended care? Of course, Mr. Brooks. Maya can stay until 8. She's already asking if she can sleep over, actually. We had cupcakes today. Cupcakes explain everything. He allowed himself another small smile. I'll be there by 7:30 at the latest. Tell her I love her. She knows. The GPS directed him away from the city center toward the lakeside district where old money lived in houses that didn't need to prove anything. The rain eased as he drove, fading to a mist that clung to the manicured lawns and wrought iron gates. Ethan had never been to this part of town, had no reason to be. His apartment was a 2-bedroom rental in a middle-class neighborhood with good schools and a park within walking distance. Practical. Affordable. Everything Maya needed. This was something else entirely. The Hale residence emerged from the darkness like a magazine photograph, a modernist glass and stone structure that seemed to float above the lake, warm light spilling from floor-to-ceiling windows. Cars lined the circular driveway, expensive cars, the kind that announced their owners before they stepped out. A Tesla Model S, a Mercedes S-Class, something Italian that probably cost more than Ethan's annual salary. He parked his Honda at the end of the line, suddenly aware of the coffee stain on his tie and the scuff marks on his dress shoes. This wasn't a small gathering. This was an event. A uniformed attendant appeared at his window before he could change his mind about coming. Good evening, sir. Name? Ethan Brooks. I'm here to deliver a report to Ms. Hale. The attendant consulted a tablet. Ah, yes, financial analysis. Ms. Hale mentioned you might arrive. Please follow the path to the main entrance. Someone will direct you inside. The path was lit by subtle ground lights, each stone precisely placed. Ethan clutched his briefcase and walked, feeling increasingly out of place with every step. Through the windows, he could see well-dressed people holding champagne flutes, laughing at jokes he couldn't hear. The kind of easy confidence that came from never worrying about repair bills or childcare costs. The front door opened before he could knock. A woman in her 50s stood there, silver hair pulled back severely, professional warmth in her eyes. Mr. Brooks, I'm Catherine, the house manager. Ms. Hale is currently with guests, but she's asked that you wait in the study. Can I take your coat? I'm not really dressed for... He gestured vaguely at the party visible through the archway. I just need to drop off the report. Ms. Hale was quite insistent. Catherine smiled in a way that suggested she'd heard many similar protests over the years. The study is private, quiet. You won't need to interact with anyone unless you choose to. Ethan allowed himself to be led through a side hallway, away from the glittering main room. The study was exactly as Catherine described. Warm wood paneling, leather chairs, a fireplace crackling with real flames. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 2 walls, filled with what appeared to be actual books, rather than decorative spines. A desk occupied one corner, its surface clean except for a single laptop and a small framed photograph. May I bring you something to drink? Coffee? Something stronger? Water would be fine. Thank you. Catherine nodded and disappeared, leaving Ethan alone with his briefcase and his discomfort. He set the report on the desk and studied the room, trying to understand the woman who inhabited it. The photograph caught his attention. Victoria Hale, perhaps 10 years younger, standing with an elderly woman in front of this same house. The resemblance was striking, the same sharp cheekbones, the same intelligent eyes. The grandmother, Ethan realized. Eleanor Hale, who had built this company from a single manufacturing plant in 1962. The books told a different story. Business strategy and financial analysis, as expected, but also philosophy, poetry, architecture. A worn copy of Marcus Aurelius sat beside a pristine first edition of something by Toni Morrison. The randomness felt deliberate, as if someone had arranged their entire intellectual life for display. You're analyzing my library. Ethan turned, startled. Victoria Hale stood in the doorway, her presence somehow filling the room despite her slender frame. She wore a simple black dress that probably cost more than his car, her dark hair swept up to reveal a neck adorned with a single strand of pearls. At 40, today was her birthday, he remembered, she looked both ageless and tired, as if she'd been carrying something heavy for a very long time. I apologize. I didn't mean to pry. Nonsense. Everyone pries. You're just more honest about it than most. She closed the door behind her and crossed to the fireplace, holding her hands toward the flames as if she were cold despite the room's warmth. Thank you for coming on such short notice, Mr. Brooks. I understand you have family obligations. My daughter's in extended care. I should be able to pick her up by Maya, isn't it? Victoria glanced over her shoulder. She's 5? Ethan's surprise must have shown on his face because Victoria smiled, a thin expression that didn't quite reach her eyes. I make it a point to know my employees, Mr. Brooks, especially the ones who flag 23 pages of discrepancies in a quarterly report. You've already read it? Amanda sent me the digital version this afternoon. I wanted to discuss it with you directly, away from the office. She turned fully to face him. The Eastern European contracts. You noticed something. The numbers don't add up. No, they don't. Victoria moved to the desk and sat in the leather chair with the ease of someone accustomed to commanding any room she entered. But you're the first person in my organization to say so out loud. I'm sure others see what they want to see, what's convenient, what doesn't require them to ask uncomfortable questions. She gestured to the chair across from her. Sit down, Mr. Brooks, please. This may take a while. Ethan sat, his briefcase clutched in his lap like a shield. The fire crackled. Outside, the lake reflected city lights, peaceful and indifferent to whatever was unfolding in this room. My grandmother built this company, Victoria said softly, from nothing. A single factory, $1,000 in borrowed capital, and more stubbornness than any woman should reasonably possess. When she died 4 years ago, she left me everything. The company, the house, the board's eternal resentment that a woman still controls what they've always believed should be theirs. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. The words were automatic, worn smooth by repetition. My grandmother was a practical woman. She understood that sentiment has no place in business, and that men will always find ways to take what they believe they're owed. So she built protections into the company charter, legal safeguards, things that couldn't be unwound without significant effort. Victoria paused, and for a moment, Ethan glimpsed something beneath her careful composure. Exhaustion, fear, the weight of fighting battles that never seemed to end. One of those safeguards was a clause in the family trust. If the majority shareholder, me, remains unmarried by age 40, control of the company transfers to a committee selected by the board. The words hung in the air. Ethan felt something shift in his understanding of the evening, of this conversation, of why he'd been summoned to deliver a report that had already been read. Today is your 40th birthday. Yes. And you're not married. No. Silence stretched between them. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Ms. Hale, why are you telling me this? Victoria leaned forward, her dark eyes fixed on his face with an intensity that made him want to look away. She was beautiful, he realized, genuinely beautiful, not just polished and expensive, but there was something feral beneath the elegance, something desperate being held in check by sheer force of will. Because tomorrow morning, Robert Chen, the man currently trying to destroy my company from within, will present the board with evidence that I've failed to meet the terms of the trust. By Friday, I'll be removed from my position. By Monday, the company my grandmother spent 60 years building will be dismantled and sold for parts. The Eastern European contracts are part of his scheme. Fake vendors, shell companies, money disappearing into accounts that will never be traced. Victoria's hands tightened on the arms of her chair. I've suspected for months, but I couldn't prove it. Your report is the first concrete evidence I've had. Then expose him. Take it to the board yourself. The board is compromised. A bitter laugh escaped her. Do you know how many of them have already been promised positions in Chen's new organization? How many have been quietly assured that their loyalty will be rewarded? Ethan's mind raced, sorting through implications and impossibilities. He thought of Maya, waiting at the Montessori with crayon-stained fingers and questions about when Daddy would come home. He thought of his small apartment, his reliable routine, the careful life he'd constructed from the wreckage of his wife's death. He thought of Victoria Hale, alone in this beautiful house, surrounded by people who wanted to take everything from her. "What do you need from me, Ms. Hale?" She stood abruptly, moving to the window, her reflection ghostly against the darkness outside. When she spoke, her voice was different, stripped of corporate polish, raw with something that might have been shame. "I need you to understand something first. I didn't bring you here for your analysis, Ethan. I brought you here because Amanda ran background checks on every unmarried man in my organization last week. You were the only one who came back clean." "Clean? No gambling debts, no hidden addictions, no affairs, no scandals, no anything that could be leveraged against you." She turned to face him. "You're a widower raising a young daughter on a financial analyst's salary. You volunteer at her school. You haven't missed a parent-teacher conference in 3 years. Your credit score is higher than most executives I know, and your only vice appears to be a concerning fondness for true crime podcasts. You investigated me? I investigated everyone. You're the only one Robert Chen couldn't buy." The statement sat between them, heavy with implications Ethan wasn't ready to examine. He stood, his briefcase falling forgotten to the floor. "Ms. Hale, Victoria, please." She moved closer, and he could smell her perfume now, something expensive and subtle, like the rest of her carefully constructed life. "I'm not proposing anything improper, Ethan. I'm proposing a business arrangement, a legal contract that protects both of us. You're proposing marriage. I'm proposing a solution. To a 48-hour deadline? To a 60-year legacy that deserves better than what Robert Chen has planned." Ethan's heart hammered in his chest. This wasn't his world. Lakeside mansions and corporate conspiracies and beautiful women making impossible requests. His world was bedtime stories and packed lunches and the quiet satisfaction of numbers that balanced correctly. "I have a daughter," he said finally. "Every decision I make affects her." "I know." Victoria's composure cracked slightly, revealing something that looked almost like hope. "That's why I'm asking you instead of anyone else. Because you understand what it means to protect something that matters. She lost her mother. She can't lose anything else." "I'm not asking her to lose anything." Victoria's voice softened. "I'm asking if you'd be willing to give her something more. Stability, security, the kind of future a financial analyst's salary can't always guarantee." "That sounds like a bribe." "It sounds like honesty." Victoria held his gaze. "I need a husband the board can't dismiss, someone unbuyable, unconnected to the political games that have defined my entire adult life. You need—" She stopped herself. "What do you need, Ethan? I'm asking genuinely, not as a negotiation tactic." The question cut through his defenses more effectively than any appeal to greed or ambition could have. What did he need? Time, rest, the ability to stop calculating every expense, every risk, every possible disaster that might separate him from his daughter. Peace. "I don't know," he admitted. "Then take time to figure it out. But understand this. After tonight, I won't have any time left to give." Victoria walked to the desk and picked up his briefcase, holding it out to him like an offering. "Go pick up your daughter, Ethan. Read her a bedtime story. Think about what I've said. And if I say no, then I'll thank you for your honesty and begin looking for alternative solutions." A faint smile crossed her face, the first genuine one he'd seen from her. "I'm not a monster. I'm just a woman running out of options." Ethan took the briefcase. His hand brushed hers briefly, accidentally, and something electric passed between them. Not attraction exactly, but recognition. Two people drowning in separate storms, catching sight of each other across the water. "I need to think." "Of course." He moved toward the door, then stopped. The words came out before he could prevent them, a small act of rebellion against the absurdity of this situation. "For what it's worth, Miss Hale, Victoria, happy birthday." She laughed. A real laugh, startled and genuine, that transformed her face into something younger and less guarded. "Thank you, Ethan. That's the first time anyone said that to me today, who wasn't being paid to do so." The drive to the Montessori passed in a blur. Ethan's mind churned through possibilities and impossibilities, constructing arguments and tearing them down with equal intensity. By the time he pulled into the parking lot, he'd convinced himself 3 times to refuse and twice to accept. Maya ran toward him the moment he entered the building, her small body colliding with his legs with enough force to make him stagger. "Daddy, you're late." "I know, sweetheart. I'm sorry." He lifted her into his arms, breathing in the familiar scent of children's shampoo and the particular sweetness of her skin. "How were the cupcakes?" "Chocolate, with sprinkles. Mrs. Patterson said I could have 2 because I was the best at cleanup." "That's my girl." He carried her to the car, buckled her into the booster seat, listened as she recounted every moment of her afternoon in exhaustive detail. The paper crown had been lost during finger painting. Someone named Tyler had cried because his painting looked like a blobby blob. Maya had drawn a picture of their family, Daddy, Maya, and a cat they didn't have yet, but really needed. "Can we get a cat, Daddy? A orange one? Mrs. Patterson has an orange cat named Cheeto. We'll talk about it." "That means no." "That means we'll talk about it." She accepted this with the philosophical resignation of a 5-year-old who understood the limits of parental promises. Ethan watched her in the rearview mirror as he drove, her small face lit by passing streetlights, her expression already turning sleepy despite her protestations of being not even a little tired. This was his world. This small person with her endless questions and her paper crowns and her drawings of families that included imaginary cats. Everything else, the spreadsheets, the reports, the corporate politics he tried so hard to avoid, existed only to support this. Could he gamble it on a stranger's desperate proposal? Could he afford not to? They reached the apartment as the rain started again. Ethan carried Maya inside, her head heavy against his shoulder, and settled into the familiar routine of bath time, story time, the negotiations over exactly how many stuffed animals could reasonably share a pillow. "Daddy?" Maya's voice was muffled by her blanket. "Yes, sweetheart?" "Mrs. Patterson says I need a mommy." Ethan's heart clenched. He sat on the edge of her bed, smoothing the hair from her forehead with practiced gentleness. "Mrs. Patterson said that?" "No, Tyler said that. Because his mommy brings cookies. Mrs. Patterson said families come in all shapes and sizes, and Tyler needs to mind his business. Mrs. Patterson is right. But Daddy?" Maya's eyes were serious now, the sleepiness fading. "Do you ever get lonely?" The question hit him like a physical blow. He thought of Sarah, her laugh, her warmth, the way she'd made everything seem possible. He thought of the empty side of his bed, the silence of the apartment after Maya fell asleep, the bone-deep exhaustion of carrying everything alone. "Sometimes, sweetheart, but I have you, and that's more than enough." "Okay." Maya yawned, apparently satisfied with this answer. "I love you to the moon." And back again. "Sleep tight, baby girl." He left her door cracked open, the hall light casting a reassuring glow across her floor, and walked to the kitchen. The apartment was small but clean. His one concession to chaos was the stack of financial journals on the coffee table, each one dog-eared and annotated. Ethan poured himself a glass of water and stood at the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. Somewhere across the city, Victoria Hale was probably doing the same thing, standing alone in her beautiful house, waiting to see if a stranger would decide to save her or let her drown. His phone buzzed, an unknown number. "This is Victoria. I obtained your personal number from employee records. I apologize for the intrusion." He hesitated, then typed a response. "Is everything okay?" "Yes." "No, I don't know." A pause, then another message appeared. "I wanted to tell you something I didn't say earlier. This arrangement wouldn't be permanent, 5 years at most. Enough to stabilize the company and find an alternative governance structure. After that, a quiet divorce, generous compensation. Your life returned to normal." Ethan stared at the words. 5 years. Maya would be 10. Old enough to understand if things went wrong. Old enough to remember. "What about appearances?" he typed. "People will talk. Let them. I've been talked about my entire life. What's one more scandal? It's not just about you. My daughter. Would be protected. Absolutely, non-negotiably protected. I would never let this arrangement harm her." Another pause. "You have my word, Ethan, for whatever that's worth." He thought about it. About the numbers that didn't add up, the corruption he'd glimpsed in his report. About a woman who'd inherited an empire and was about to lose it to men who'd been waiting 60 years for their chance. About the exhaustion in Victoria's eyes. the loneliness in her voice when she'd thanked him for saying happy birthday. "Can we talk tomorrow?" he typed finally. "Somewhere neutral." "I need to ask more questions." "Of course. Name the place and time, the coffee shop on 5th and Main, 8 o'clock. I'll arrange childcare. I'll be there." Ethan put down his phone and looked at his reflection in the rain-streaked window. He didn't recognize the man staring back, someone standing at the edge of a decision that could change everything. Tomorrow, he would ask his questions. He would analyze the situation with the same precision he applied to quarterly reports and balance sheets. And then, maybe, he would do something completely irrational for the first time in his careful, calculated life. The coffee shop was deliberately ordinary. Ethan had chosen it for exactly that reason, a place where billionaire CEOs would seem as out of place as he'd felt in her lakeside mansion. Neutral territory. He arrived at 7:45, claiming a corner booth with a clear view of the entrance. The morning crowd was sparse. A few early commuters, a retired couple sharing a newspaper, a college student hunched over a laptop. None of them looked like they'd been sent to spy on a clandestine meeting about corporate marriage fraud, which was exactly how Ethan's life had never been, and might soon become. Victoria walked in at exactly 8 o'clock, dressed in clothes that probably cost more than his monthly rent, but styled simply enough to avoid attention. Jeans that somehow looked expensive, a white blouse, a blazer that said serious businesswoman rather than vulnerable heiress. She spotted him immediately and crossed the room with the focused stride of someone accustomed to making people wait, not the reverse. "Thank you for meeting me." She slid into the booth across from him, declining the menu the waitress offered with a polite shake of her head. "Just black coffee, please." "Same," Ethan said, though he'd already finished 2 cups while waiting. They sat in silence until the waitress returned with 2 steaming mugs. Victoria wrapped her hands around hers like she was cold, despite the morning warmth. "You have questions?" "Many of them." "Then ask." Ethan had prepared for this, actually written down his concerns on a notepad at 2 in the morning while Maya slept down the hall. He didn't need the list now. The words were burned into his mind. "What happens to my job?" "You would need to resign from the financial analyst position, obviously. A CEO can't be seen to be sleeping with an employee, even one she's married to." Victoria's voice was matter-of-fact. "Instead, I would offer you a consulting contract, legitimate work, documented income, something to explain why you're suddenly living above your means." "Living?" "At the house. With me." Victoria met his eyes steadily. The arrangement would need to appear genuine, Ethan. Separate residences would raise more questions than they answer. "My daughter would have her own suite, a live-in nanny if you want one, access to the best schools in the city, whatever she needs." Victoria paused. "I'm not trying to buy your compliance. I'm trying to show you what I can offer in exchange for what I'm asking." Ethan thought of Maya's cramped bedroom, the closet that barely held her clothes, the toys she'd outgrown but they hadn't replaced because space was limited. He thought of the guilt he carried every time he couldn't afford something she wanted. "What about us? You and me? What about us?" "You're talking about marriage." That word means something, even if the arrangement doesn't. Victoria's composure flickered. Just for a moment, something vulnerable passed across her face. "I'm not asking you to love me, Ethan. I'm not even asking you to pretend convincingly. I'm asking you to stand beside me long enough for me to save what my grandmother built." "And then?" "And then we find a way forward. Maybe that's divorce. Maybe that's—" She stopped, shaking her head slightly. "I don't know. I don't know what my life looks like after this because I've never had the luxury of planning that far ahead." The admission surprised him. She seemed like someone who planned everything, controlled every variable. But here she was, in an ordinary coffee shop, confessing that she couldn't see past the next 48 hours. "Tell me about Robert Chen." Victoria's expression hardened. "Robert is what happens when mediocrity meets ambition. He was my grandmother's junior partner for 15 years, always useful, never essential. When she died, he expected to inherit control. The board expected it. Everyone expected it, except her. She left everything to you instead. Everything. And Robert has spent the last 4 years trying to take it back. The Eastern European contracts are just the latest scheme. He's been siphoning money, sabotaging operations, whispering in the right ears. Victoria took a long sip of her coffee. My grandmother was brilliant, but she was also optimistic. She believed in systems, in legal protections, in the fundamental decency of people when their interests aligned. She didn't understand that some people just want to watch things burn. And this marriage clause in the trust was meant to protect me. In 1962, a woman running a company needed legitimacy that only a husband could provide. My grandmother built that requirement into the trust as a shield, not a trap. Victoria's laugh was bitter. She couldn't have known that 60 years later, I'd still be fighting the same battles. Ethan processed the information, looking for gaps, inconsistencies, reasons to walk away. He found none. "Why me?" he asked finally. "Really? Not the background check, not the analysis. Why me specifically?" Victoria set down her coffee cup and studied him with those dark, intelligent eyes. The silence stretched long enough to become uncomfortable. "Because you looked at me last night like I was a person, not a problem. Because you asked what I needed instead of what you could get. Because when you talked about your daughter, your whole face changed, and I thought—" She stopped. "I thought maybe you'd understand what it means to fight for something you love. I'm fighting for a 5-year-old. You're fighting for a billion-dollar company. I'm fighting for my grandmother's legacy, the jobs she created, the families who depend on those jobs. The idea that a woman can build something lasting without having it stolen by men who believe it was always rightfully theirs." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "This isn't about money for me, Ethan. I've had money my whole life. This is about whether I'm allowed to be more than someone's daughter, someone's acquisition, someone's cautionary tale." The words hit him somewhere deep, in the place where he kept his own fears about Maya's future, about what she would face as a woman, the battles she would have to fight that he couldn't fight for her. "I have conditions." Victoria's eyebrows rose. "I'm listening." "Maya comes first, always. If this arrangement ever threatens her, her stability, her happiness, her sense of security, it ends immediately. No questions, no arguments." "Agreed." "I won't be arm candy. If we're doing this, I'm actually working, using my skills to help protect the company. The analysis I gave you barely scratched the surface of what I saw in those numbers. I was hoping you'd say that. And this stays between us. The real arrangement, I mean. I won't lie to my daughter about what we are, but I also won't explain corporate strategy to a 5-year-old. As far as she knows, Daddy made a friend who needs help." Victoria nodded slowly. "That's actually quite elegant. It's survival. I've had 3 years of practice making complicated things simple enough for her to understand." "Then we have a deal?" Ethan looked at the woman across from him, powerful, desperate, beautiful in a way that seemed almost incidental to everything else about her. He thought about the life he was about to leave behind, the small apartment, the predictable routine, the safety of invisibility. He thought about Maya, asking if he ever got lonely. "We have a deal," he said, "on one more condition." "Name it." "Yet if this becomes real, if somewhere along the way this stops being a business arrangement, I need you to tell me. Not as a test, not as a strategy, just honest." Victoria's face went very still. For a long moment, she didn't speak. "I don't know what real looks like anymore," she said finally. "I've spent so long protecting myself from people who wanted pieces of me that I'm not sure I'd recognize genuine connection if it happened." "Then we'll figure it out together. That's what partners do." Something shifted in her eyes. A softening, a vulnerability she probably hadn't shown anyone in years. "Partners," she repeated, as if testing the word. "Partners." Victoria extended her hand across the table. Ethan took it, feeling the warmth of her palm, the slight tremor that betrayed her nerves despite her controlled exterior. "Then let's get married, Ethan Brooks." The ceremony happened that afternoon. Victoria had a judge on standby, a friend of her grandmother's, someone trustworthy who wouldn't ask questions. The courthouse was empty by design. The paperwork rushed through bureaucratic channels with the efficiency that only significant wealth could provide. Ethan wore the same suit he'd worn to work the day before. Victoria changed into a simple ivory dress that she claimed was the only appropriate thing in her closet, but probably cost more than his car. They stood in a wood-paneled chamber that smelled of old books and floor polish. and they said words that neither of them fully believed but both desperately needed. The ring was from a pawn shop. Ethan had insisted on that. Something real, something with history, not a diamond purchased to impress. Victoria had looked at him strangely when he slid it onto her finger, a thin gold band with a small sapphire that caught the light. "It's beautiful," she said, and sounded like she meant it. "It was my grandmother's." The lie came easily, which disturbed him. "She would have wanted you to have it." "Your grandmother?" "She believed in second chances." The judge pronounced them married. Victoria kissed his cheek, a butterfly brush of lips that somehow felt more intimate than anything else that had happened. Ethan signed his name on the certificate and became, legally and permanently, the husband of Victoria Hale. They walked out of the courthouse into pale afternoon sunlight. A black car waited at the curb, driven by someone who didn't ask questions. Victoria climbed in first. Ethan followed. "We need to pick up Maya," he said, checking his watch. "School ends in 2 hours." "I know. I've already sent someone to notify the administration that her father will be late due to an important meeting." Victoria pulled out her phone, scrolling through messages. "And I've made arrangements for a nanny interview tomorrow. 3 candidates, all with excellent references." You move fast." "I don't have a choice." She looked up from her phone, her expression softening. "But we can slow down now, just for a moment. You've done something extraordinary today, Ethan." "I've done something insane." "Those aren't mutually exclusive." He laughed despite himself, a real laugh, surprising in its warmth. Victoria smiled, and for a moment she looked almost young. "So what happens now?" Ethan asked. "Now we go home. You get settled. I make some calls to ensure the news reaches the board before tomorrow's meeting." She paused. "And tonight, if you're willing, I'd like you to meet someone." "Who?" "My grandmother. Not literally, of course. But I have videos, recordings she made before she died, instructions she left for situations she hoped I'd never face." Victoria's voice caught slightly. "I think she would have liked you, Ethan. I think she would have understood what you're doing." "What am I doing?" "Saving something worth saving. That's what she always told me. Find the things worth saving and fight for them." Victoria reached across the seat and took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "I think you might be one of those things, whether you know it yet or not." Ethan looked at their joined hands, the gold ring glinting on her finger. He thought about Maya, waiting at school with no idea that her world was about to change. He thought about Sarah, whom he still missed every single day, and whether she would approve of what he was doing. He thought she would. Sarah had always believed in protecting people who needed protecting, and fighting battles that seemed impossible. "Let's go home," he said, and for the first time, the word felt like it might actually mean something. The Hale residence looked different in daylight, bigger somehow, though that was probably impossible. Ethan stood in the grand foyer while Victoria dismissed the staff with quiet instructions, watching the way light fell through the floor-to-ceiling windows and turned the lake into a sheet of hammered silver. "I've prepared a suite for you and Maya in the East Wing," Victoria said, returning to his side. "It has a connecting door to the main nursery, but that can be locked if you prefer privacy. There's also a small kitchen, a study, and a balcony overlooking the water." "You prepared this?" "I had time to think, between the party and our meeting this morning." She led him through the house, pointing out rooms and amenities with the practiced efficiency of a tour guide. "The library is open at all hours. The gym is in the basement. If you need anything at all, Catherine handles household matters." "What about you?" Victoria stopped walking. "What about me? Where do you live in all of this?" Ethan gestured at the cavernous space around them. "Which part is actually yours?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. She blinked, processing. "The study you saw last night. My bedroom, on the 2nd floor. The garden, when the weather permits." She paused. "It's a large house for one person. I've grown accustomed to existing in small corners of it." "That's lonely. That's practical." But her voice wavered slightly, and Ethan knew he'd touched something true. They reached the East Wing suite. It was beautiful. Warm wood floors, high ceilings, windows that framed the lake like living paintings. A child-sized bed had been prepared in a room decorated with subtle whimsy. Clouds painted on the ceiling, a bookshelf stocked with picture books, a stuffed elephant sitting guard on the pillow. I didn't know what colors she likes, Victoria said, almost apologetically. These can all be changed. She likes purple. Then we'll paint it purple. Victoria smiled. Or she can decide. Children should have choices, even small ones. My grandmother taught me that. Ethan walked to the window and looked out at the water. Behind him, he heard Victoria move through the room, adjusting small things. A pillow, a picture frame, the angle of a lamp. Why aren't you married? He asked suddenly. The adjusting stopped. Excuse me? You're smart, beautiful, wealthy. You could have married anyone, solved this problem years ago. Ethan turned to face her. Why didn't you? Victoria was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. Because marriage requires trust. And trust requires vulnerability. And vulnerability, in my world, is just another weapon people use against you. That's not an answer. No, it's an excuse. She sat down on the edge of Maya's new bed, her elegant composure suddenly giving way to something more human. I was engaged once, 8 years ago. His name was Marcus, and he was everything I thought I wanted. Handsome, ambitious, supportive. 2 weeks before the wedding, I discovered he'd been feeding proprietary information to a competitor. The engagement was a long con. I'm sorry. Don't be. It taught me something valuable. Victoria looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much betrayal. Never let anyone close enough to destroy you. Build walls so high that nothing can climb them. And now you've let me inside those walls. I've let you into my house. That's not the same thing. But her voice lacked conviction, and they both knew it. Ethan crossed the room and sat down beside her, close enough to speak quietly, far enough to maintain the boundaries she clearly needed. I'm not going to betray you, Victoria. Not because you're paying me, not because we have a contract, because I know what it's like to lose everything, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone. Your wife. Her name was Sarah. She died in a car accident 3 years ago. Drunk driver. Random, meaningless, the kind of tragedy that doesn't even make sense to be angry about. Ethan's voice was steady, though the words still hurt. I spent the first year just surviving. The second year learning how to live again. This third year, I've been trying to figure out what comes next. And you think this is what comes next? Marriage to a woman you barely know? I think this is what comes next. Ethan gestured at the beautiful room around them, the child's bed waiting for his daughter. Not the arrangement, not the contract, but the chance to do something meaningful again, to use what I have, my skills, my time, my attention, for something that matters. Victoria studied his face, searching for deception, for hidden motives, for any of the betrayals she'd learned to expect. She found none. You're a strange man, Ethan Brooks. I've been told that before. I mean it as a compliment. I know. They sat together in silence, watching the afternoon light shift across the lake. Somewhere in this house, phones were ringing, messages were being sent. The machinery of corporate war was grinding into motion. But here, in this moment, there was only stillness. We should pick up Maya, Victoria said finally. Introduce her to her new home. We? You're her father, but I'm... Victoria hesitated, as if the word she needed didn't exist. I'm part of this now, whatever this becomes. I'd like to meet her properly. Ethan stood and offered his hand. Victoria took it, rising with a grace that seemed entirely unconscious. One thing first, he said. What? What do I call you? When we're alone? When there's no one watching? What's the name you answer to? Victoria considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Vicky, she said finally. My grandmother called me Vicky. No one has since she died. Then Vicky it is. Her smile was small but genuine, a crack in the wall she'd spent decades building. Let's go meet your daughter, Ethan. I have a feeling she's going to be the most interesting person I've met in a very long time. Maya Brooks took approximately 4 seconds to decide that the lakeside mansion was the greatest thing that had ever happened to her. Daddy, there's a lake! With ducks! She pressed her face against the car window, her eyes enormous. Is this where we live now? For a while, sweetheart. Yes. Why? Ethan glanced at Victoria, who sat beside him in the back of the car, watching Maya with an expression of carefully restrained fascination. Because Daddy has a new job, and part of the new job means we get to live in this nice house. With the ducks? Yes, with the ducks. Best day ever, Victoria laughed, a genuine sound of delight that transformed her face. She's wonderful. She's energetic. There's a difference. But Ethan was smiling too, watching his daughter catalog every wonder visible through the car window. The house, the lake, the gardens, the enormous garage with its fleet of expensive vehicles. When the car stopped, Maya was out before anyone could help her, running across the manicured lawn toward the water with the fearless abandon of childhood. Should we, Victoria started, give her a minute. She needs to explore. They watched as Maya discovered a family of ducks near the shore, her delighted squeals carrying across the property. She crouched at the water's edge, completely absorbed in conversation with birds that couldn't understand her. She talks to everything, Ethan explained. Ducks, trees, her stuffed animals, the toaster sometimes. The toaster? She's convinced it's sad, because no one ever says good morning to it. Victoria's smile widened. That's either genius or insanity. At 5 years old, they're essentially the same thing. Maya came running back, her shoes muddy, her face radiant with joy. Daddy, the ducks know my name. I told them and they said quack, which means hello Maya in duck language. That's amazing, sweetheart. Ethan knelt to her level. I want you to meet someone. This is Victoria. She owns this beautiful house. Maya studied Victoria with the unfiltered intensity of childhood, taking in every detail. You're pretty, she announced finally. Are you Daddy's friend? Victoria glanced at Ethan, then back at Maya. Yes, I'm Daddy's friend, and I hope I can be your friend too. Do you like ducks? I don't know many ducks personally, but I'm open to learning. Maya considered this response with grave seriousness. Then she reached out and took Victoria's hand. Come on, I'll introduce you. The biggest one is named Sir Quacksalot. He's very important. Victoria allowed herself to be led toward the lake, her designer heels sinking into the grass, her expression somewhere between bewildered and enchanted. Ethan watched them go, his daughter and his wife of 3 hours, and felt something shift in his chest. Maybe this would work. Maybe, against all odds and reason, this impossible arrangement would become something worth keeping. Or maybe it would all collapse tomorrow, when Robert Chen discovered what they'd done and unleashed whatever retaliation he'd been planning. Either way, Ethan thought, at least the ducks seem friendly. Bechad. That night, after Maya was settled in her new room, purple paint already ordered, Sir Quacksalot and his family thoroughly catalogued, Ethan found Victoria in the study, staring at her laptop with an expression of barely controlled fury. The board meeting is scheduled for 9 tomorrow morning, she said without looking up. Robert already knows. He sent 3 messages demanding to understand what I've done. What did you tell him? Nothing. Let him wonder. Victoria closed the laptop with more force than necessary. The marriage certificate is being filed as we speak. By morning, it will be public record. And then? And then the real fight begins. She stood, moving to the window, her reflection ghostly against the darkness. He'll try to claim fraud, that the marriage isn't genuine, that it was arranged specifically to circumvent the trust. Wasn't it? Legally, that doesn't matter. The clause says married. We're married. Victoria turned to face him. What matters is whether we can hold the line long enough for the truth to come out. The Eastern European contracts? Among other things, your analysis was just the beginning, Ethan. I have investigators working on the rest. I want to help. You already are. No, really help. The numbers, the patterns, that's what I do. Let me dig deeper. Victoria studied him for a long moment. The files are in my office. Everything I have on Robert's activities for the past 4 years. Then let's get started. They worked until 3 in the morning, surrounded by spreadsheets and financial documents and cups of coffee that grew cold and were replaced. Ethan fell into the familiar rhythm of analysis, patterns emerging, connections forming, a picture assembling itself from fragments. Robert Chen was either arrogant or stupid, possibly both. The shell companies had too many common denominators. The shipping invoices had been modified, but not the underlying purchase orders. The money trails were Byzantine but traceable, if you knew what to look for. By the time exhaustion finally claimed them, Ethan had assembled a preliminary case that went far beyond the Eastern European contracts. This wasn't just skimming. This was systematic theft on a scale that would have made Eleanor Hale spin in her grave. "This is enough," Victoria said, reading through his notes. "This is more than enough to trigger an independent audit. It's not proof. It's probable cause. That's all we need right now." She looked up at him with something like wonder in her eyes. "You did this in one night." "I had help." Ethan nodded toward the files. "Your investigators did the legwork. I just connected the dots." "You make it sound simple." "Numbers are simple. People are complicated." He stretched, feeling every hour of lost sleep in his bones. "We should rest. Tomorrow's going to be difficult." Victoria nodded slowly. "Your room is prepared." Catherine left fresh towels. "I know." Ethan hesitated at the door. "Thank you, Vicky, for trusting me with this." "Thank you for being trustworthy." She smiled, tired but genuine. "Good night, Ethan. Sleep well, if you can." He left her there, surrounded by evidence of a conspiracy that had been years in the making, and walked through the silent house to the East Wing suite. Maya was asleep, sprawled across her new bed like a small starfish, her paper crown from the Montessori perched crookedly on her pillow. Ethan stood in the doorway and watched her breathe, this small person who depended on him for everything, who had no idea how dramatically her life had just changed. He would protect her. Whatever it took, whatever sacrifices were required, he would make sure this gamble didn't hurt her. And somewhere along the way, he realized, he'd started wanting to protect Victoria too. The thought followed him into an uneasy sleep, punctuated by dreams of boardrooms and betrayals and a woman with dark eyes asking him to save something worth saving. Tomorrow, the war would begin. But tonight, in this strange new house by the lake, there was peace. Part 2. Louis. Viết sao nghiên đến sao nghiên 502 liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện. Phá hối thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mọi phần liền mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch, sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ, phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc, kể theo ngôi thứ ba, giữ độ kịch tính không Việt lan man, kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau. Louis trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang document 15 giờ 4 phút. The dawn came gray and reluctant, as if the sky itself knew what was waiting in the boardroom at Hale Industries headquarters. Ethan woke to the sound of Maya's laughter, echoing through the East Wing suite, followed by the patient voice of Catherine, explaining that ducks preferred to be fed outside, not in the kitchen. He lay still for a moment, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, letting the reality of his situation settle into his bones. He was married to his CEO, and in approximately 4 hours, he would walk into a boardroom and help her fight for everything she had. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, he felt something closer to purpose, a clarity he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death, since grief had reduced his world to the narrow corridors of survival and responsibility. He showered quickly, dressed in the only other suit he'd brought from the apartment, and found Maya in the kitchen attempting to feed toast crumbs to an invisible duck she insisted had followed her inside. "Mr. Quackers is hungry, Daddy. He came through the door when Catherine wasn't looking." "Mr. Quackers will have to wait until after breakfast." Ethan lifted her onto a stool at the enormous kitchen island. "And I think his name was Sir Quack-Salat yesterday." "That's his formal name. Mr. Quackers is what his friends call him." "I see." Victoria appeared in the doorway, already dressed for battle in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Ethan's monthly salary. Her hair was pulled back severely, her makeup flawless, her expression carefully neutral. But Ethan had spent enough time with spreadsheets and patterns to recognize tension when he saw it. "Good morning." Her voice was steady, controlled. "Maya, I heard you made a new friend." "Mr. Quackers. He's invisible but very polite." "The best kind of friend." Victoria accepted a cup of coffee from Catherine and turned to Ethan. The car will be ready in 30 minutes. I've arranged for a private entrance to avoid the press. There's press? Someone leaked the marriage certificate an hour ago. Every business journalist in the city is currently camped outside headquarters. Ethan absorbed this information, watching Maya happily demolish a plate of scrambled eggs, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering around them. Will she be safe here? Catherine has raised 3 children and managed this household for 20 years. She's more than capable. Victoria's expression softened slightly as she watched Maya. And I've hired additional security, discreet but present. You expected this. I expected Robert to move fast. The press is just noise. The real battle happens in the boardroom. Ethan nodded, then knelt beside Maya's stool, bringing himself to her eye level. Sweetheart, Daddy has to go to work today. It might be a long day, but Catherine is going to take care of you. And when I come home, we can feed the ducks together, the real ones. Maya studied his face with the unsettling perceptiveness children sometimes displayed. Are you scared, Daddy? The question hit him like a punch. He forced himself to smile. A little bit, but that's okay. Being brave means doing things even when you're scared. Mommy used to say that. She was right. He kissed her forehead. I love you to the moon. And back again. Go be brave, Daddy. He stood blinking against the sudden sting in his eyes and found Victoria watching him with an expression he couldn't read. Ready? She asked. No, but let's go anyway. The drive to headquarters was tense and silent, the city sliding past tinted windows like a film neither of them was watching. Victoria spent most of the trip on her phone, fielding calls from lawyers and board members and people Ethan didn't recognize. Her voice remained calm throughout, a practiced steadiness that revealed nothing. Ethan used the time to review his notes, the patterns he'd identified, the connections he'd traced, the damning picture that emerged when you knew how to look. He'd compressed everything into a single presentation, 23 slides that could end Robert Chen's career if the board chose to listen. The question was whether they would choose to listen. You're quiet, Victoria said finally, pocketing her phone as they approached the underground garage. I'm thinking. About what? About what happens if this doesn't work. Victoria turned to face him, her dark eyes steady despite the fear that had to be churning beneath her composure. Then I lose everything. The company, the house, the ability to honor what my grandmother built. She paused. But you don't lose anything, Ethan. The prenuptial agreement is clear. If this arrangement ends, you walk away with enough money to start over anywhere you want. That's not what I'm worried about. Then what? Ethan looked at her, really looked, past the armor of expensive clothes and controlled expressions to the woman underneath. I'm worried about you. The words hung between them, unexpected and raw. Victoria's composure flickered, something vulnerable surfacing before she could suppress it. That's not your job. Maybe not, but it's happening anyway. The car stopped before she could respond, the engine's silence suddenly oppressive. Victoria took a breath, squared her shoulders, and became the CEO again, the mask sliding into place with practiced ease. Stay close to me. Don't speak unless I ask you to. And whatever happens in that room, remember that we're on the same side. I know which side I'm on, Vicky. She flinched at the name, not with displeasure, but with something closer to surprise, as if she'd forgotten anyone was allowed to see past her defenses. Then let's go save a company. The boardroom was exactly as Ethan had imagined it. Enormous windows overlooking the city, a table long enough to land planes on, leather chairs occupied by men and women who looked like they'd been carved from money and self-importance. 14 board members, plus support staff, plus lawyers who lined the walls like well-dressed vultures. And at the far end of the table, Robert Chen. He was smaller than Ethan expected, compact, silver-haired, with the kind of forgettable face that probably served him well in corporate espionage. His eyes were sharp, though, tracking Victoria's entrance with the focused intensity of a predator. Victoria. His voice was smooth, pleasant, entirely false. How lovely of you to join us. And this must be your husband. The word dripped with contempt. Ethan felt it land and chose not to react. Robert, Victoria's voice was ice. I see you've already made yourself comfortable in my chair. I thought, given the circumstances, someone should maintain order. Robert gestured expansively at the assembled board. We all received quite a shock this morning. A secret marriage? To an employee? On the eve of your 40th birthday. He shook his head with theatrical sadness. It raises some uncomfortable questions. The only uncomfortable questions here are about your activities over the past 4 years. Victoria remained standing, refusing to cede the power dynamic. But we'll get to those shortly. A ripple of discomfort passed through the board members. Several exchanged glances. One woman, Margaret Wells, according to the nameplate, leaned forward with interest. Victoria, perhaps we should start with the matter at hand. The trust clause is quite specific about the marriage requirement. While we're all surprised by your announcement, the documentation appears to be in order. Appears to be. Robert's voice carried just enough doubt to poison the well. But surely we should verify the legitimacy of this union before making any decisions. A marriage contracted specifically to circumvent trust provisions would hardly be... My marriage is none of your business, Robert. Victoria cut him off with the precision of a surgeon. What is your business is the systematic fraud you've been perpetrating against this company for years. Silence fell like a guillotine. Robert's pleasant expression didn't waver, but something shifted behind his eyes. A calculation, a reassessment. That's quite an accusation. It's not an accusation. It's a fact. Victoria nodded toward Ethan. My husband, and yes, Robert, my husband, is one of the most talented financial analysts I've ever employed. Last night he spent 6 hours reviewing your activities. What he found is rather illuminating. This was his cue. Ethan stepped forward, his laptop already open, the presentation ready. Mr. Chen, I'd like to walk the board through some irregularities in the Eastern European distribution contracts. Page 23 of the most recent quarterly report, for those who have copies. Papers rustled. Several board members pulled out documents. Robert remained motionless, his smile frozen in place. Over the past 18 months, shipping costs through our European subsidiary have increased by 32%, while delivery times have actually improved. Ethan connected his laptop to the room's display system, and his first slide appeared on the wall screen. Given that fuel prices dropped 11% in the same period and labor costs remained stable, this represents a statistical impossibility. Statistical anomalies happen, Robert said smoothly. Surely you're not suggesting... I'm not suggesting anything yet. I'm presenting data. Ethan advanced to the next slide. These are the vendor contracts filed with our accounting department over the past year. 17 different shipping companies, all based in various Eastern European countries. Each one submitted invoices that were paid promptly and without question. He paused, letting the numbers sink in. 11 of those companies don't exist. The murmur that passed through the room was audible. Margaret Wells removed her glasses and leaned closer to the screen. What do you mean, don't exist? I mean, they have no physical addresses, no employees, no trucks, no ships. They're shell companies, registered to post office boxes in countries with minimal oversight. Ethan advanced through several more slides, showing registration documents, payment records, the damning trail of money flowing to nowhere. In the past 18 months alone, these phantom vendors have received over $47 million in payments from Hale Industries. This is absurd. Robert's voice had lost some of its smoothness. These contracts were vetted by our procurement department. Are you suggesting widespread collusion? I'm suggesting that someone with sufficient authority could easily override standard verification procedures. Ethan met Robert's eyes directly for the first time. Someone who's been with the company long enough to know which buttons to push. Someone who might have a personal interest in destabilizing operations before a critical board meeting. You're accusing me of theft? Based on spreadsheets prepared by Victoria's convenient new husband? Robert stood, his composure finally cracking. This is a setup, a desperate attempt to distract from the real issue, that Victoria has violated the terms of the family trust through a fraudulent marriage. There's nothing fraudulent about our marriage. Victoria's voice was quiet but deadly. Ethan and I were married yesterday in a legal ceremony witnessed by Judge Patricia Chen, no relation to you, Robert, despite the name. The documentation is impeccable. The timing is suspicious. The timing was urgent because I knew exactly what you were planning. Victoria moved closer to the table, her presence somehow filling the room despite her slender frame. You've spent 4 years positioning yourself to take control of my grandmother's company. The trust clause gave you a deadline, my 40th birthday. Everything was supposed to fall into place today. Robert's smile had vanished entirely. You can't prove any of this. I don't have to prove it. Victoria gestured at the screen, still displaying Ethan's analysis. All I have to do is present enough evidence to justify an independent audit, which I'm formally requesting, effective immediately. Seconded. Margaret Wells raised her hand without hesitation. I want forensic accountants on this by end of business today. This is ridiculous. Robert looked around the room, searching for allies. James? Howard? Are we really going to let Victoria derail this meeting with unsubstantiated accusations? James Whitmore, a heavy-set man in his 60s, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Robert, the numbers are concerning. I think an audit is reasonable. Howard? Howard Stein, younger and sleeker, with the hungry look of someone who'd been promised rewards, seemed to struggle with competing loyalties. Finally, he nodded slowly. An audit protects everyone. If the accusations are false, it clears your name. If they're true, he trailed off meaningfully. Robert's face went through several transformations: rage, calculation, forced calm. When he spoke again, his voice had regained some of its smoothness, but the edges were showing. Fine. Conduct your audit, but the matter of Victoria's marriage still requires resolution. The trust clause requires me to be married by age 40, Victoria interrupted. I am married. The clause is satisfied. Victoria pulled a document from her briefcase and laid it on the table. This is my grandmother's original intent letter, written when she established the trust. I'll read the relevant passage. The marriage requirement exists to ensure my granddaughter has a partner in life, someone to share the burdens of leadership. Whether she finds love or merely companionship, the choice is hers to make, on her own terms, in her own time. She looked up, meeting the eyes of each board member in turn. On her own terms, in her own time. My grandmother never intended this clause to be a weapon. She was protecting me from exactly the kind of manipulation Robert has attempted. And I have found a partner, someone I trust, someone who has already proven his value to this company in ways Robert never will. Victoria's hand found Ethan's, their fingers intertwining in full view of the board. The gesture was strategic, he knew, calculated to demonstrate unity. But her grip was tight, almost desperate, and he squeezed back without thinking. The motion for an independent audit is on the table, Margaret said crisply. All in favor? Hands rose around the room. 8, 9, 10, a clear majority. Robert watched his carefully constructed scheme crumble in real time, his expression hardening into something ugly. This isn't over, Victoria. No, it's not. Victoria's voice was steel. But when it is, you'll be the one answering questions, not me. But the meeting continued for another 2 hours. Procedural matters, audit parameters, the selection of an independent accounting firm. Ethan stood quietly beside Victoria throughout, watching the dynamic shift as board members recalibrated their loyalties. Robert remained present, but increasingly isolated, his earlier confidence evaporating as the weight of accusation settled around him. When the meeting finally adjourned, Victoria's hand remained in Ethan's as they walked out of the boardroom. Neither spoke until they were safely in her private office. The door closed against the chaos erupting in the halls outside. Then Victoria exhaled, her entire body sagging with released tension. We did it. The audit isn't finished yet. Robert is finished. Victoria turned to face him, something like wonder in her eyes. You destroyed him, Ethan. In 15 minutes, with nothing but numbers and logic, you destroyed 4 years of careful sabotage. I presented evidence. The board made their own decision. The board would have believed whatever story was told most convincingly. You gave them a story they couldn't ignore. She moved closer, her hand still holding his. I chose well, didn't I? When I asked you to help me, you were desperate. I was strategic. Victoria smiled, a real smile, tired but genuine. Desperation and strategy aren't mutually exclusive. Neither is gratitude. She kissed him. Not on the cheek, not a butterfly brush of lips, A real kiss, unexpected and electric, that short-circuited Ethan's careful thoughts and left him breathless. When she pulled back, her dark eyes were searching his face. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. Don't apologize. You didn't sign up for Victoria," he said her name firmly, cutting through her spiral. "I knew what I was signing up for. What I didn't know was how I'd feel about it." "And how do you feel?" The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither was ready to fully examine. "Confused," Ethan admitted. "Scared. And something else I don't have a name for yet." Victoria nodded slowly, accepting his honesty. "That makes two of us." The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. Forensic accountants arrived from 3 different firms, each one hand-selected by Margaret Wells to ensure objectivity. Robert's office was sealed pending investigation. Press conferences were held, statements issued, the machinery of crisis management grinding into motion. Ethan found himself pulled into meeting after meeting, his analysis suddenly in demand by people who'd never noticed his existence before. He explained the patterns he'd found, walked auditors through his methodology, answered questions with the patient precision that had defined his entire career. By 6 o'clock, exhaustion had settled into his bones, heavy and complete. He excused himself from yet another conference room and found a quiet corner near the elevator banks, pulling out his phone to check on Maya. Catherine answered on the first ring. "She's wonderful, Mr. Brooks. We fed the ducks, painted several masterpieces, and she's currently teaching me the proper etiquette for invisible duck guests. Apparently, Mr. Quackers prefers his toast unbuttered." Ethan laughed despite his fatigue. "Tell her Daddy will be home soon. And Catherine, thank you for everything." "It's been my pleasure, truly. This house has been too quiet for too long." He hung up and leaned against the wall, letting his eyes close for just a moment. The day's events replayed behind his eyelids. The boardroom confrontation, Victoria's kiss, the slow collapse of Robert Chen's carefully constructed facade. "You look exhausted." Ethan opened his eyes to find Victoria standing before him, equally tired, but hiding it better. "I was thinking about Maya." "She's fine. I checked with Catherine 20 minutes ago." Victoria moved to stand beside him, their shoulders almost touching. "You should go home, be with her." "What about you?" "I have approximately 7 more hours of meetings, interviews, and damage control. The price of being the CEO everyone's suddenly paying attention to." "That doesn't seem fair." "Fair has nothing to do with it." Victoria glanced at him sideways. "This is my fight, Ethan. You've done more than enough." "It's our fight now. That's what partners do, remember?" Something softened in her expression. "You keep using that word." "It keeps being true." They stood in silence for a moment, 2 people caught in circumstances neither had anticipated, finding unexpected comfort in proximity. "Go home," Victoria said finally. "Kiss Maya goodnight. Tell her I said the ducks are lucky to have her as a friend." "You could come with me." The offer surprised them both. Victoria's eyes widened slightly. "I have meetings." "Delegate! You just survived an attempted corporate coup. You're allowed to take an evening off." "I don't take evenings off." "Maybe you should start." Victoria stared at him, conflict playing across her features. The CEO warred with the woman underneath, duty against desire, control against something more human. "1 hour," she said finally. "I can give you 1 hour before I need to be back online." 1 hour is enough for dinner and bedtime stories." "I've never done bedtime stories." "Maya will teach you. She's very patient with beginners." They took the private elevator to the parking garage, leaving the chaos of headquarters behind. The drive home was quiet, but different from the morning's tension. More companionable. 2 people settling into a shared exhaustion that created its own intimacy. Maya greeted them at the door with the enthusiasm of a child who'd had an excellent day and was determined to share every detail. "Daddy, Victoria, Mr. Quacker's learned a new trick. He can disappear whenever grown-ups are looking. Catherine says that's very impressive for a duck." "It does sound impressive." Victoria knelt to Maya's level with a grace that surprised Ethan. "Did you teach him that trick?" "No, he already knew, but I taught him to say please and thank you. Catherine says manners are important, even for invisible ducks." "Catherine is very wise." Dinner was simple, pasta that Ethan cooked while Victoria sat at the kitchen island, watching with fascinated attention as if she'd never seen someone operate a stove before. Maya narrated the entire process, explaining which ingredients were essential and which were optional but nice. Daddy always adds extra garlic because garlic keeps vampires away, Maya explained seriously. We don't have vampires in our apartment, so it works. Sound logic, Victoria agreed. Should we add extra garlic to this house as well? Yes, please. Houses this big probably have lots of vampire hiding spots. They ate together at the enormous dining table, Maya's chatter filling the silence with welcome noise. Victoria seemed uncertain at first, unused to the casual chaos of family meals. But gradually she relaxed, even laughing when Maya demonstrated the proper way to eat spaghetti using only sound effects. Slurp sounds mean it's delicious, Maya explained. That's a scientific fact. I didn't know that, Victoria said. Now you do, you're welcome. After dinner, Ethan carried Maya to her new purple-requested bedroom while Victoria followed, hovering at the doorway like she wasn't sure if she belonged. Bedtime story, Maya announced, selecting a book from the shelf. Charlotte's Web. We're on chapter 7. Charlotte is about to do something important. Do you want me to read? Ethan asked. Victoria should read. She has a nice voice. Victoria looked startled. I haven't read children's books and... It's easy, Maya assured her. You just say the words and make them interesting. Daddy does voices for the different characters, but you don't have to if you're a beginner. Something shifted in Victoria's expression. Vulnerability, uncertainty, a longing that looked almost painful. She sat carefully on the edge of Maya's bed and accepted the book, opening to the marked page. Chapter 7, she read, her voice slightly unsteady. Bad news. Ethan leaned against the doorframe and watched as Victoria Hale, billionaire CEO, corporate warrior, woman who claimed not to take evenings off, read about a spider and a pig to a 5-year-old girl she'd known for less than 2 days. Maya listened with rapt attention, occasionally correcting Victoria's character voices. Wilbur sounds more worried than that, and offering commentary on the plot. Charlotte is very smart, but Wilbur doesn't appreciate her yet. By the end of the chapter, Maya's eyes were drooping, her grip on her stuffed elephant loosening. You're good at stories, she murmured. Will you read more tomorrow? Victoria glanced at Ethan, something uncertain in her expression. If you'd like me to. I would. Maya yawned enormously. You should stay forever. This house is too big for one person. The words hung in the air, innocent and devastating. Victoria's composure cracked for just a moment, something raw and wanting surfacing before she could suppress it. Sleep tight, Maya. You too, don't let the vampires bite, unless Daddy added enough garlic. They left her room together, closing the door to a gentle crack. The hallway was quiet, the house settling around them with the particular silence of large, empty spaces. She's remarkable, Victoria said finally. You've done an incredible job with her. She's done an incredible job with me. I just try to keep up. Victoria smiled, tired and genuine. I should go. Those meetings won't attend themselves. Thank you for staying, for reading to her. Thank you for asking me. Victoria paused, seeming to struggle with something. Ethan, about earlier, the kiss. We don't have to talk about it. I think we do. She turned to face him fully, her dark eyes serious. This arrangement was supposed to be simple, business, a contract with clear terms and defined outcomes. But today, in that boardroom, when you were destroying Robert's schemes with nothing but your brilliant mind and your spreadsheets, she stopped, shaking her head. I felt something I haven't felt in a very long time, something that scared me. What? Hope. The word came out like a confession. That maybe this doesn't have to be just business. That maybe I chose better than I knew. Ethan stepped closer, close enough to see the vulnerability she was working so hard to hide. When you kissed me, I didn't pull away. I noticed. Do you know why? Because it would have been awkward? Because I wanted you to. He reached up, hesitating just before touching her face. I don't know what this is, Victoria. I don't know where it goes, but I know that when I walked into that boardroom today, I wasn't just protecting a business arrangement. I was protecting you. Ethan, you don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know. They stood in the quiet hallway, the space between them charged with everything unsaid. Victoria's hand rose to cover his where it hovered near her face, pressing his palm against her cheek. I haven't let anyone protect me in a very long time. I know. I'm not sure I remember how. That's okay. I'm patient. She laughed softly, leaning into his touch. You're impossible, Ethan Brooks. I've been told that before. I mean it as a compliment. I know. She kissed him again, softer this time, tentative, a question rather than an impulse. Ethan answered it with gentle certainty, his hand sliding from her cheek to cradle the back of her head. When they parted, Victoria's eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. I have to go. I know. But I'll come back, tonight, tomorrow, every day until this is over. I'll be here. She stepped away, her hand trailing down his arm before releasing him entirely. Good night, Ethan. Good night, Vicky. He watched her walk toward the main house, her figure growing smaller in the vast corridor. Just before she turned the corner, she looked back, and something passed between them. A promise, a possibility, the first fragile threads of something neither had expected to find. Then she was gone, and Ethan was alone in the quiet wing with his sleeping daughter and his spinning thoughts. He returned to Maya's room, standing in the doorway to watch her breathe. She looked so small in the enormous bed, so peaceful in her new purple promise surroundings. Whatever happened next, with the company, with Victoria, with this impossible arrangement that had taken over his life, she would be okay. He would make sure of it. But as he finally retreated to his own room, Ethan found himself hoping for more than okay. For the first time in 3 years, he allowed himself to imagine a future that wasn't just survival. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe it was dangerous. But Victoria was right about one thing. Hope was scary. It was also, he was beginning to realize, absolutely necessary. The next week passed in a whirlwind of audits, investigations, and carefully managed chaos. Forensic accountants worked around the clock, following the money trails Ethan had identified and uncovering dozens more. The 11 shell companies he'd flagged were just the beginning. Robert Chen had constructed an elaborate network of phantom vendors, fake consultants, and buried expenses that stretched back nearly 4 years. The total amount stolen approached $73 million. He was patient, Ethan observed, studying the latest findings in Victoria's home office. Took just enough to stay under the radar. If he'd been greedier, someone would have noticed sooner. Someone did notice. Victoria looked up from her laptop. You. I noticed an anomaly. The investigation did the rest. Don't be modest. It doesn't suit you. Ethan smiled despite himself. Their relationship had settled into a strange rhythm, professional during the day, something more complicated in the evenings. Victoria continued to work brutal hours, but she'd started returning to the house for dinner whenever possible, joining Ethan and Maya for meals that grew increasingly comfortable. Maya, for her part, had adopted Victoria with the wholehearted enthusiasm of a child who'd decided something was true. She's my friend now, Maya announced to anyone who would listen. She reads stories and knows about ducks, and she's very pretty even when she's tired. Thank you for the assessment, Victoria said dryly. You're welcome. Friends should be honest. The press remained ravenous, camped outside headquarters and the lakeside house in equal measure. Stories appeared daily, some accurate, most speculation, all of them hungry for details about the mysterious marriage that had saved Hale Industries from hostile takeover. Ethan ignored them as best he could, but the scrutiny was unavoidable. His background had been dissected in multiple publications: the modest upbringing, the academic scholarships, the career trajectory that had been competent but unremarkable. Several articles questioned what Victoria could possibly see in him, a nobody analyst, according to one particularly vicious gossip column. Victoria had read that article over breakfast, her expression darkening with each paragraph. I could have them investigated, find out who their sources are. Don't. Ethan had continued eating his cereal with deliberate calm. They're not wrong. I am a nobody analyst. You're my husband. That doesn't make me somebody. It makes me lucky. It makes you exceptional. Victoria had set down the article with more force than necessary. Anyone can see that. They're just too blind to look. The fierceness in her voice had surprised him. He was still thinking about it days later, turning her words over like stones, trying to understand the shape of what was growing between them. On Thursday, Robert Chen was formally suspended pending criminal investigation. The board meeting was brief but brutal. Margaret Wells presented the audit findings with devastating precision. The shell companies, the diverted funds, the carefully constructed paper trail that led directly to Robert's personal accounts. He'd been skimming millions while positioning himself to take control of the company, essentially stealing from the organization he planned to own. The authorities have been notified, Margaret concluded. Mr. Chen's assets have been frozen. We expect formal charges within the week. Robert sat in silence throughout the presentation, his earlier confidence entirely evaporated. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, a man watching his carefully constructed world collapse around him. When they asked if he had anything to say, he raised his eyes to Victoria's face. Your grandmother would be ashamed of you. My grandmother would have done exactly what I did. Victoria's voice was cold and certain. She built this company to mean something. You tried to turn it into your personal piggy bank. I made this company what it is. I was here when it was nothing, when Eleanor was just a woman with a factory and a dream. You deserved nothing. Victoria leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. That's what you never understood, Robert. No one deserves success. You earn it, every single day, by doing work that matters, by being someone worth following. And you think you're worth following? A woman who had to buy herself a husband to keep her position? I didn't buy a husband. Victoria's hand found Ethan's under the table. I found a partner. There's a difference. Robert laughed bitterly. You found a patsy. Someone naive enough to believe you actually care about him. But you're just like your grandmother, Victoria. You use people. You manipulate them. And when they're no longer useful, that's enough. Margaret's voice cut through Robert's tirade. Security will escort you from the building. You're not welcome here anymore. They watched in silence as Robert was led away, his shoulders hunched, his earlier arrogance reduced to bitter ashes. The door closed behind him with a finality that felt like an ending. Well, Margaret said into the quiet that followed, I think we can call this matter resolved. The board dispersed, murmuring amongst themselves, but Victoria remained seated, staring at the closed door. Hey, Ethan squeezed her hand. You okay? He worked with my grandmother for 15 years. She trusted him with everything. Victoria's voice was distant, reflective. How does someone become that? How do you spend decades building something together and then try to destroy it? I don't know. Neither do I. And that scares me. She turned to face him, her dark eyes troubled. What if I become that? What if one day I look around and realize I've turned into the very thing I fought against? You won't. How do you know? Because you're asking the question. Ethan lifted their joined hands, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. People who become monsters don't worry about becoming monsters. They justify. They rationalize. They convince themselves they're right until they actually believe it. And I don't do that? You questioned your own grandmother's legacy clause. You asked me if the marriage arrangement was ethical. You wondered out loud whether you were using me, whether I was truly consenting, whether Maya might be hurt by the chaos. Ethan smiled. People who don't care about those things don't ask about them. Victoria stared at him for a long moment. When did you become wise? I have a 5-year-old. Wisdom is mandatory. She laughed, a genuine sound, surprised and warm. Take me home, Ethan. I'm tired of boardrooms. They left headquarters together, hand in hand, past the remaining reporters who shouted questions they didn't answer. The car was waiting, the driver discreet, the privacy glass raised against the world. What happens now? Ethan asked as they pulled away from the building. Now we rebuild. The company, the trust, everything Robert damaged. Victoria leaned her head against his shoulder, a casual intimacy that had become increasingly common. It will take months, maybe years. I'm not going anywhere. I'm starting to believe that. She lifted her head, meeting his eyes. Ethan, I need to tell you something. What? The prenuptial agreement, the one that gives you a generous settlement if the marriage ends. Victoria took a breath. I had my lawyers draw up an amendment this morning. Ethan felt something cold settle in his stomach. An amendment? It removes the exit clause. Victoria's voice was steady, but her hands were trembling slightly. If you sign it, there's no easy out, no guaranteed settlement, just us, together, for real. Why would you do that? Because I don't want an escape route anymore. Her eyes glistened. I've spent my whole life building walls, making sure I could always walk away. But you, she shook her head. You make me want to stay. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. This was supposed to be a business arrangement. I know. A contract, 5 years maximum, quiet divorce, generous compensation. I know. Victoria's voice cracked slightly. Is that still what you want? The question hung between them, weighted with everything they'd built over the past week, shared dinners and bedtime stories and quiet conversations in the evening light. The way Victoria looked at Maya, the way she'd started looking at him, the kiss in the hallway, the touch of her hand, the growing certainty that what had started as desperation had become something else entirely. No, Ethan said finally. That's not what I want. What do you want? I want what Maya has. Invisible ducks and absolute certainty. I want to wake up every morning knowing exactly where I belong. He cupped her face in his hands, marveling at the softness of her skin, the hope in her eyes. I want you, Victoria. Not the CEO, not the heiress, not the woman with all the answers. Just you. I don't know who that is anymore. Then we'll figure it out together. He kissed her, slow and deep, pouring everything he couldn't articulate into the press of lips and the tangle of breath. Victoria melted against him, her walls crumbling, her careful composure finally giving way to something raw and real. When they parted, her face was wet with tears she didn't bother to hide. I think I might be falling in love with you, she whispered. I think I might be falling in love with you too. That wasn't part of the plan. Best things never are. They held each other as the car carried them home, two people who'd found something unexpected in the midst of chaos. Outside, the world continued to turn. Journalists speculating, investigators investigating, the machinery of commerce and consequence grinding forward. But inside the car, in the quiet space they'd created together, there was only this, two hearts learning to beat in sync, discovering that the most carefully constructed arrangements could become something infinitely more precious. Hope, it turned out, was only the beginning. Part B lưu ý. Viết sao nghìn đến sao nghìn năm trăm to liên kết liên mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện pha hội thoại, tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch, sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ, phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc. Kể theo ngôi thứ ba, giữ đồ kịch tính không viết lan man, kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang document 15 giờ 10 phút. The weeks that followed Robert Chen's arrest should have been a time of peace. Instead, they became something far more complicated, a gradual unraveling of the certainties Ethan had built his life around, replaced by something terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. The lakeside house, once merely a beautiful prison of circumstance, began to feel like home. Victoria's presence, initially a strategic necessity, became the thing he looked forward to most at the end of each day. And Maya, with the uncanny wisdom of children, noticed everything. "Daddy," she said one morning over breakfast, her small face serious with concentration. "When you look at Victoria, your eyes get different." Ethan nearly choked on his coffee. "Different how?" "Soft, like when you used to look at Mommy's pictures." Maya returned to her cereal with the casual devastation only a 5-year-old could deliver. "I think that's nice. Victoria needs someone to look at her soft." He didn't know what to say. The comparison to Sarah hit him somewhere deep, in the place where he'd kept his grief carefully contained for 3 years. It wasn't painful exactly, more like unexpected, a door opening to a room he'd thought was locked. "Do you miss Mommy?" he asked carefully. Maya considered this with grave seriousness. "Sometimes, but Mrs. Patterson says missing people means they were important, and important people don't really go away." She looked up at him with eyes so like her mother's that his heart clenched. "Victoria is important now too. That doesn't mean Mommy isn't." "When did you get so wise?" I practice. Maya grinned, revealing a gap where she'd lost her first tooth the week before. Also, Mr. Quackers told me. He's very philosophical for a duck. Ethan laughed despite the emotion tightening his throat. Whatever else came of this impossible arrangement, his daughter was thriving. The stability, the security, the simple peace of knowing she was cared for, it was worth whatever complications followed. Those complications arrived 3 weeks after Robert's arrest, in the form of a reporter named Sandra Walsh. She appeared on the morning news first, a sharp-faced woman with hungry eyes and a reputation for destroying careers with carefully crafted exposés. Her target this time was obvious: the convenient marriage that had saved Hale Industries from hostile takeover. Anonymous sources within the company have revealed that Ethan Brooks was specifically selected for his clean background, Sandra reported, her voice dripping with implication. Documents suggest that Victoria Hale ran background checks on multiple employees before settling on her eventual husband, a process that raises serious questions about the legitimacy of this union. Victoria watched the segment in her home office, her face carefully blank. "They have the Amanda Chen email," she said quietly, "the one where I asked her to compile employee records." "Is that illegal?" "No, but it doesn't look good." She turned off the television with sharp finality. Sandra Walsh doesn't deal in illegality. She deals in perception. And the perception she's creating is that I bought myself a husband to circumvent the trust clause. "You did, in a sense." Victoria flinched. "Ethan, I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm just saying the story isn't entirely false." Ethan moved to stand beside her, his hand finding the familiar curve of her shoulder. "We did start as an arrangement. That's not a secret. But it's not the whole truth either." Victoria's voice was fierce, protective. "What we have now, what we're building, that's not an arrangement. That's not a contract." "I know." "Do you?" She turned to face him, her dark eyes searching his. "Because Sandra Walsh is going to dig into every corner of your life, every relationship, every decision, every moment that might suggest you were paid to play a role. And when she's done, she'll present it to the world as proof that I'm exactly what Robert accused me of being, a woman who uses people. Let her dig." Ethan cupped her face in his hands, feeling the tension in her jaw. "She won't find anything that changes what we are." "You don't know that." "I know you. I know Maya. I know that whatever story she constructs, it can't touch the life we're building together." He pressed his forehead to hers. "Trust me, Vicky. Please." For a long moment she was silent. Then she exhaled, some of the rigidity leaving her body. "I don't know how to trust," she whispered. "Not like you mean." "Then let me show you." The interview request came the next day. Sandra Walsh wanted to meet with both of them, separately and together, for what she called a comprehensive profile of the couple who saved Hale Industries. The phrasing was deliberately neutral, designed to seem fair while leaving room for any narrative she chose to construct. "We should decline," Victoria's PR team advised. "Refusing to engage is a valid strategy." "Refusing to engage makes us look guilty." Victoria studied the request letter with narrowed eyes. "She'll run the story with or without us. At least if we participate, we have some control over the narrative." "With respect, Ms. Hale, Sandra Walsh is not known for fair treatment of her subjects. Her piece on the Morrison family last year. I know what she did to the Morrisons." Victoria's voice cut like glass. "I also know that they refused every opportunity to tell their own story. We won't make that mistake." Ethan watched the exchange in silence, feeling increasingly out of his depth. Corporate strategy was Victoria's domain. He understood numbers and patterns, not the delicate dance of public perception. "What do you want to do?" Victoria asked him when the PR team had left. "I want to protect our family, whatever that takes. Even if it means exposing everything, the arrangement, the desperation, all of it." "The arrangement isn't shameful." Ethan chose his words carefully. "We did what we had to do in a difficult situation. That's not a crime. It's not romantic either. So we tell people the truth. We started as a strategic partnership and became something real. That's a better story than a fairy tale anyway." Victoria studied him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You continually surprise me, Ethan Brooks." "I try." She smiled despite herself. "Fine. We do the interview, but we do it together and we do it on our terms. The interview was scheduled for the following Friday at the lakeside house. Sandra Walsh arrived precisely on time, accompanied by a photographer and a sound technician, the full apparatus of investigative journalism descending on the quiet sanctuary Ethan had come to love. She was smaller than she'd appeared on television, almost delicate, but her eyes had the same hungry quality he'd noticed in the broadcast. She looked around the house with the calculating gaze of someone cataloging evidence. "Beautiful home," she said, her voice professionally warm. "Very different from your previous residence, Mr. Brooks." "It is." Ethan declined to elaborate. "Shall we begin?" They sat in the formal living room, a space Victoria rarely used, deliberately chosen for its neutral elegance. Sandra settled into an armchair across from them, her recorder already running. "I want to start with the obvious question." Sandra's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Your marriage occurred less than 48 hours before a critical board vote that would have removed Ms. I'm grateful that after 17 years of wondering, my son finally knows his father, and that his father turned out to be the kind of man I always hoped he would be." Ethan was silent for a long moment, and Daniel could see him wrestling with whether to participate or retreat behind his protective walls. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm grateful that I was wrong about a lot of things, but mostly about whether I could ever belong somewhere. I'm still figuring out what that means, but for the first time in my life, it feels possible." Daniel felt tears burning behind his eyes. "I'm grateful for second chances, for the opportunity to know both my sons, and for their willingness to give me a chance even when I don't deserve it." "You deserve it," Marcus said quietly. "You've always deserved it." They ate then, the conversation flowing more easily as the meal progressed. "How do you respond to accusations that you're essentially a kept man?" "I respond by continuing to work." Ethan kept his voice level, refusing to rise to the bait. "I'm still analyzing financials. I'm still contributing to the company's operations. The only thing that's changed is my living situation and my relationship status. And your access to significant wealth. I didn't marry Victoria for money. I married her because she asked me to help her save something that mattered, and I believed in what she was fighting for." "Very noble." Sandra's tone suggested she found it anything but. "But sources within the company describe a very calculated selection process, background checks, interviews, a deliberate search for the perfect candidate." "There was nothing secret about my process," Victoria interjected. "When I realized the trust clause would be invoked, I needed to find someone trustworthy in very little time. Yes, I looked at employee records. Yes, I considered multiple candidates. Is that different from any other form of due diligence? Most people don't apply due diligence to romance. Most people don't have billion-dollar companies at stake." Victoria's composure never wavered. "I won't apologize for being thorough." The interview continued for another hour, probing questions about their relationship, their living arrangements, their plans for the future. Sandra was skilled at her craft, finding the soft spots and pressing gently, letting her subjects reveal more than they intended. But Victoria was equally skilled, deflecting the more dangerous inquiries with practiced ease while projecting an image of calm confidence. And Ethan, for his part, stuck to the truth, the simplest and most powerful defense he knew. "One final question," Sandra said as her team began packing up equipment. "Mr. Brooks, when did your feelings for Mrs. Hale become romantic? Was it before or after the marriage?" The question was a trap, and they all knew it. Before would suggest the marriage was always genuine, undermining the narrative of calculation. After would confirm that the union started as pure strategy, lending weight to every accusation of manipulation. Ethan considered his answer carefully. "Love isn't a switch you flip," he said finally. "When I agreed to this arrangement, I respected Victoria. I admired what she was fighting for. Over time, that respect deepened into something more." He looked at Victoria, letting his genuine emotion show. "I can't point to a specific moment when admiration became love. I just know that now, I can't imagine my life without her." Sandra's expression flickered, the first crack in her professional facade. "That's quite a statement. It's quite a truth." The interview ended shortly after. Sandra Walsh departed with her team, leaving behind a house that felt somehow emptier for her absence. "How bad will it be?" Ethan asked when they were alone. "Depends on what she decides to focus on. Victoria moved to the window, staring out at the lake. She has enough material to spin the story either way. Then we wait. I hate waiting. I know. Ethan came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. But we did what we could. Now we focus on what matters. What matters? Dinner with Maya, bedtime stories, the things that haven't changed since this started. Victoria leaned back into his embrace, some of the tension leaving her body. How do you do that? Do what? Make everything seem manageable, even when it's not. Practice. He kissed the top of her head. Also, I have excellent advisors. Maya says Mr. Quacker's is quite philosophical. She laughed despite herself, a sound that still surprised him with its warmth. Your daughter is remarkable. Our daughter, if you want her to be. Victoria went very still. What? Maya adores you. She's already started calling you Victoria who reads stories to distinguish you from Victoria on the TV who looks serious. Ethan turned her to face him. We're building a family here. Not just a partnership, not just an arrangement. A real family. I've never had a real family. Victoria's voice was barely above a whisper. My grandmother was the closest thing, and she was always more mentor than parent. Then we'll figure it out together. That's what we do. Her eyes glistened. You make it sound so simple. It's not simple, but it's possible. That's all that matters. She kissed him then, not with desperation or strategy, but with something deeper. A promise. A beginning. The article appeared 2 weeks later, on a Sunday morning when the whole house was sleeping. Ethan read it first, scrolling through Sandra Walsh's carefully crafted prose on his phone, while Victoria slept beside him, her face peaceful in the early light. His heart pounded as he absorbed each paragraph, waiting for the axe to fall. It never did. The piece was titled A Partnership That Became Personal, Inside the Marriage That Saved Hale Industries. The tone was surprisingly nuanced, skeptical but not hostile, probing but ultimately fair. Sandra had included everything: the background checks, the urgent timing, the strategic calculation that had initially driven their union, but she'd also included other things. The way Victoria looked at Ethan during the interview, the genuine emotion in his voice when he spoke about love. The small details, hands touching, shared glances, the comfortable intimacy of two people who'd become something more than partners. The conclusion was measured but unmistakable. Whatever the marriage had started as, it had become real. And perhaps, Sandra suggested, that was the most interesting story of all. Victoria woke to find Ethan staring at his phone with an expression she couldn't read. What happened? What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. He handed her the phone. Sandra Walsh published her article. Victoria sat up sharply, her face draining of color. Show me. He watched her read, tracking the emotions that crossed her face: fear, tension, surprise, and finally something like wonder. She believed us, Victoria said when she finished. She actually believed us. She saw what was true. But how? I expected, she's destroyed so many people. Maybe she recognized something real when she saw it. Ethan pulled her close. Or maybe she's just a better journalist than we gave her credit for. I don't understand. Neither do I. But I'm not going to question it. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, processing the shift in her carefully constructed expectations. The board will be relieved, she said finally. The PR team will want to do a full media circuit, capitalize on the positive coverage. Or we could just be grateful and move on. Move on? The article is done. The crisis is over. Robert is in jail, the company is stable, and we have a 5-year-old who's been asking when we're going to take her to see real ducks instead of lake ducks. Ethan smiled. Maybe it's time to stop fighting and start living. Victoria looked at him as if he'd suggested something revolutionary. Living, she repeated, testing the word. It's this thing people do when they're not in crisis mode. Involves leisure time, family activities, occasionally sleeping past 6 in the morning. I don't know how to do any of those things. Then I'll teach you. Consider it my new consulting role. She laughed, the sound bright and surprising in the morning quiet. Ethan Brooks, consultant for normal living. It has a ring to it. It has something to it. She kissed him softly. Okay. Teach me how to live. The spring turned slowly into summer, and the lakeside house transformed. Where once it had been a monument to Victoria's solitary success, it became something warmer, messier, more alive. Maya's drawings appeared on the refrigerator, not because anyone put them there, but because the house had somehow accepted them as natural decor. The study where Victoria had spent countless hours alone now held a small desk for Ethan, their work mingling in the space like their lives had mingled everywhere else. They fell into routines that felt less like schedules and more like rituals. Morning coffee on the terrace, watching the lake mist burn off in the early light. Evening walks around the property, Maya running ahead to check on Sir Quacksalot and his ever-growing family. Weekend afternoons spent in the garden, Victoria had never found time to enjoy, planting flowers that Ethan knew nothing about and Maya insisted should all be purple. But beneath the domestic peace, the outside world continued to intrude. Robert Chen's trial began in June, bringing renewed media attention to the scandal that had nearly destroyed Hale Industries. Ethan found himself called to testify, his analysis of the shell companies and diverted funds forming a crucial part of the prosecution's case. The courtroom was nothing like he'd expected, smaller, more intimate, the weight of legal process pressing down like a physical force. Robert sat at the defense table, diminished from the arrogant man who'd once threatened Victoria's entire world. He didn't look at Ethan during the testimony, keeping his eyes fixed on some middle distance, already accepting what was coming. "Mr. Brooks," the prosecutor said, "can you walk the jury through what you discovered in the quarterly reports?" Ethan did. He explained the patterns, the statistical impossibilities, the money trails that led nowhere good. He spoke in the dry language of financial analysis, making fraud comprehensible through the precision of numbers. But when he looked at the jury, he saw something beyond mere understanding. They were connecting the abstract theft to real consequences, the jobs threatened, the families affected, the trust betrayed. "One final question," the prosecutor said. "In your professional opinion, how long had this fraudulent scheme been operating?" "Based on the patterns in the financial records, at least 4 years, possibly longer." Ethan paused. Mr. Chen was very careful, very patient. He took just enough to avoid triggering automatic audits spread across enough shell companies to hide the scope. If the quarterly report hadn't flagged those shipping discrepancies, the theft might have continued indefinitely. "And the total amount stolen?" "Approximately $73 million, by our most conservative estimates." A murmur passed through the courtroom. $73 million. A number too large to truly comprehend, representing years of systematic betrayal. Robert Chen was convicted on all counts. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for the following month. Victoria attended every day of the trial, sitting in the gallery with her hands folded, watching the man who tried to destroy her grandmother's legacy face justice. She didn't speak to Robert, didn't acknowledge him beyond her silent presence. But on the last day, as the verdict was announced, something shifted in her expression. Not triumph, but something closer to grief. "I thought I'd feel satisfied," she said that evening, standing at the lakeside while Maya chased fireflies across the lawn. "He deserved this. He earned every consequence. But he was part of my grandmother's world, part of the history I've spent my whole life protecting." Victoria's voice was heavy with something Ethan couldn't quite name. "When he goes to prison, that history goes with him. All those years of working with her, all the stories he could have told, they're gone now. Some legacies aren't worth preserving." "I know." She leaned against him, her weight familiar and welcome. "I'm just tired of losing things, Ethan, even the things that deserve to be lost." He held her as the darkness gathered and Maya's laughter echoed across the water. There was nothing to say. No wisdom that could make the complicated truth any simpler. Some victories came with grief attached. That was the price of caring about things that mattered. The sentencing hearing brought one final surprise. Robert Chen, given the opportunity to address the court before sentencing, chose to speak directly to Victoria. "I want you to know," he said, his voice cracking with something that might have been genuine remorse, "that I never hated your grandmother. I loved her, in my way. I believed in what she built." Victoria's face remained impassive, but Ethan felt her hand tighten in his. "But she never saw me," Robert continued. 40 years of partnership, and she still looked past me like I was furniture. When she died, she left everything to you. A woman half my age who'd spent more time in boardrooms than in factories. Everything I'd helped build, everything I'd sacrificed, and it all went to someone who'd never had to fight for any of it. So you decided to steal it instead, Victoria's voice was ice. I decided to claim what should have been mine. Robert shook his head. You can judge me if you want, but I spent my whole career being invisible, being overlooked, being told that my contributions didn't matter because my name wasn't Hale. You'll never understand what that feels like. You're right, Victoria said quietly. I won't. Because when I felt invisible, I worked harder. When I was overlooked, I proved myself. I didn't steal from the people who trusted me. Robert had no answer to that. The judge sentenced him to 15 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 7. As the courtroom emptied, Ethan found himself thinking about invisibility, about the years he'd spent being competent but unremarkable, a name on a report that people read without remembering who'd written it. He understood Robert's frustration, even if he couldn't condone what it had become. You're quiet, Victoria observed as they walked to the car, thinking about what he said. About being invisible? About being overlooked, feeling like your work doesn't matter because you're not the right kind of person. Ethan opened her car door. I know that feeling. I've lived it. Victoria paused, studying his face. Is that why you married me? To stop being invisible? No. He met her eyes steadily. I married you because you saw me, really saw me, not just my credentials or my background check results or my potential usefulness. You asked what I needed and you meant it. I was desperate. You were honest. Those aren't the same thing. She reached up, touching his face with unexpected tenderness. You keep doing that. What? Saying things that make me believe in people again. Her voice was thick. I spent so long protecting myself from disappointment that I forgot what hope felt like. And then you came along with your spreadsheets and your invisible ducks and your daughter who thinks I'm Victoria who reads stories. Is that bad? It's terrifying. She smiled through her tears. And wonderful, and I don't want it to stop. Then don't let it. He kissed her in the courthouse parking lot, surrounded by strangers and cameras and the lingering weight of justice served. None of it mattered. What mattered was this: 2 people who'd found each other in the wreckage of crisis and chosen to build something worth keeping. The cameras captured the moment, of course. By evening, the image was everywhere. Victoria Hale and her contract husband sharing an intimate embrace after the trial that had vindicated them both. But this time, the narrative had shifted. The headlines weren't skeptical anymore. They were almost romantic. Love after corporate crisis, the Hale marriage that beat the odds. From strategic partners to soulmates, Victoria Hale's unexpected happy ending. CEO finds real love in arrangement marriage, and it's the best story of the year. Maya read the headlines with great interest, sounding out the bigger words with careful concentration. What's soulmates? She asked at breakfast. People who belong together, Victoria explained, like 2 puzzle pieces that fit perfectly. Like you and Daddy? I hope so. Maya considered this with the gravity of a 5-year-old philosopher. I think you're puzzle pieces, she decided, but the kind where you have to turn them around a lot before they fit. That makes it more interesting. Ethan laughed so hard he nearly spilled his coffee. Out of the mouths of babes, he managed when he could breathe again. Victoria's smile was soft, genuine, the expression of a woman who'd stopped expecting disappointment and started allowing herself to believe. She's not wrong, Victoria said. We did have to turn around a lot. Worth it, though? Every rotation. The summer deepened, golden and generous, and the house by the lake became truly home. Ethan started a small vegetable garden behind the kitchen, recruited Maya as his assistant, and spent weekend mornings teaching her the difference between weeds and seedlings. Victoria joined them when she could, her designer clothes gradually acquiring grass stains and dirt smudges that Catherine tactfully ignored. I never had a garden, Victoria admitted one afternoon, kneeling in the soil beside Ethan while Maya attempted to teach a tomato plant to grow faster through encouragement. My grandmother said dirt was for factories, not Hales. Your grandmother sounds formidable. She was. But she missed things. Victoria looked at her dirty hands with something like wonder. She was so focused on building an empire that she forgot to enjoy what she was building it for. What was she building it for? Security, legacy, the knowledge that something would survive after she was gone. Victoria's voice was thoughtful. But I'm starting to think survival isn't enough. What's the point of a legacy if no one's there to enjoy it? Deep thoughts for a Saturday afternoon. You inspire deep thoughts. She leaned against him, heedless of the dirt they were both covered in. I want Maya to have this. The garden, the ducks, the mess, and the laughter. I want her to grow up knowing that success isn't just about boardrooms and balance sheets. She'll know, she already does. Because of you. Because of us. Maya interrupted their moment by announcing that the tomato plant had finally agreed to grow, but only if she sang it a special song every morning. What song? Ethan asked. I haven't written it yet, but it's going to be excellent. I have no doubt. They stayed in the garden until the light faded, 3 people covered in dirt and contentment, building something that didn't require quarterly reports or board approval. Just patience, just presence, just love. And that, Ethan thought, as he watched Victoria chase Maya around the tomato plants, her laughter echoing across the water, was more than any arrangement had ever promised. It was everything either of them had ever needed. Part 4. Lưu ý. Viết 6.000 đến 6.500 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện và hội thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới, liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch, sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ, phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc. Kể theo ngôi thứ 3, giữ đồ kịch tính không viết lan man, kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy sang document 15 giờ 10 trên phút. The autumn arrived quietly, painting the lakeside property in shades of gold and amber that made the house feel like something from a storybook. Ethan stood at the kitchen window one October morning, watching the mist rise off the water, thinking about how much had changed since that desperate night when Victoria Hale had asked him to marry her. 6 months. It felt simultaneously like a lifetime and like no time at all, the days blurring into weeks, into seasons, each one building on the last until the life they'd constructed together felt less like an arrangement and more like something inevitable. Maya was at school now, enrolled in the prestigious Lakeside Academy that Victoria had attended as a child. She'd been nervous about starting, a new school, new friends, the pressure of being associated with the Hale name, but had adapted with the resilience that continued to amaze him. Within weeks, she'd become a leader in her kindergarten class, organizing elaborate games involving invisible ducks and teaching her classmates the proper etiquette for addressing imaginary royalty. She's going to be president someday, Victoria had observed after the first parent-teacher conference. Or possibly a benevolent dictator. The teachers aren't sure which. She gets that from you. The dictatorship tendencies? The leadership qualities. Ethan had smiled. The dictatorship tendencies are all Sarah. It was getting easier to talk about Sarah. Not painless, probably never painless, but easier. Victoria listened when he mentioned his late wife, didn't flinch or look away, didn't treat his past like competition for his present. She understood somehow that loving Sarah's memory didn't diminish what he felt for her. The coffee maker beeped, pulling him from his thoughts. He poured 2 cups and carried them to the terrace, where Victoria was already working on her laptop, wrapped in one of his old sweaters, despite owning dozens that cost more than his car. Board meeting today, she said without looking up. Quarterly projections and the restructuring proposal for the Eastern European division. Nervous? Cautious. She accepted the coffee with a grateful nod. The restructuring is necessary, but it means job cuts. I hate that part. You've found positions for most of the affected employees in other divisions. Most, not all. Victoria's jaw tightened. There are 47 people who won't have jobs by January. 47 families who will be affected by decisions I made in a conference room. You didn't make those decisions alone, and you didn't create the problems Robert caused. No, but I'm responsible for solving them. That means the consequences are mine too. Ethan sat beside her, setting his own coffee on the table. Do you remember what you told me the night we met? About fighting for something worth saving? Vaguely. I was rather desperate at the time. You said your grandmother taught you that. Find the things worth saving and fight for them. He waited until she met his eyes. You're fighting for the company, Vicky, the whole company, including the people who will be affected by these cuts. You've spent months finding alternatives, creating transition programs, doing everything possible to minimize the damage. That matters. Does it matter to the 47 people losing their jobs? It might. When they see how hard you tried, when they realize they weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet, it might. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. You have an irritating habit of making me feel better about difficult things. It's part of my consulting role. Emotional support is billable. She laughed despite herself, a sound that still surprised him with its warmth, its genuine pleasure. I love you, Ethan Brooks. I love you too. They'd started saying it casually now, these 3 words that had once seemed impossible, not as declarations or confessions, but as facts, as true and unremarkable as the coffee going cold on the table. The morning passed in comfortable parallel work. Victoria on video calls with board members and division heads, Ethan reviewing financial models that supported her restructuring proposal. They'd developed a rhythm over the months, their skills complementing each other in ways neither had anticipated. Victoria was strategic, seeing patterns in people and politics that Ethan would have missed. He was analytical, finding the numerical foundations for her instincts. Together, they'd begun transforming Hale Industries from a company recovering from betrayal into something stronger, more transparent, more accountable, more aligned with the values Eleanor Hale had originally championed. I've been thinking, Victoria said during a break between calls, about the trust clause. What about it? It's still there, still active. If our marriage ends before I turn 45, control reverts to the board committee. She paused. I want to dissolve it. Ethan set down his laptop. Dissolve how? Remove the marriage requirement entirely. Make my control of the company independent of my relationship status. Victoria's eyes were steady, measuring his reaction. It would mean going to the board, admitting that the clause was used strategically, potentially opening up legal challenges. It would also mean you don't need me anymore, professionally. I never needed you professionally. Victoria's voice was fierce. I needed someone to stand beside me, to help me fight. You did that. What happens to the trust clause doesn't change what you mean to me. Then why dissolve it? Because I don't want our marriage to be tied to legal requirements and corporate strategy. I don't want you to ever wonder if I'm staying because I need you or because I want you. She moved closer, taking his hands. I want you, Ethan, just you, without clauses or contingencies. I never wondered. I know, but I've wondered if you wondered. Victoria's smile was rueful. I've spent so much of my life calculating, strategizing, looking for angles. You deserve better than that. You deserve a wife who chose you without ulterior motives. You did choose me without ulterior motives. The original motives were practical, sure, but everything that came after deserves to stand on its own. Victoria squeezed his hands. Will you support me in this? Going to the board, taking the risk? Do you need to ask? No, but I wanted to hear the answer anyway. Then yes, always yes. She kissed him, soft and lingering, a promise sealed without witnesses. The board meeting was scheduled for the following week, giving them time to prepare the proposal and anticipate objections. Margaret Wells, now chair of the governance committee, agreed to sponsor the amendment, a significant endorsement that would carry weight with undecided members. Victoria, this is a significant change, Margaret said during their planning session. Some board members will argue that removing the clause weakens your position. My position was weak when I was hiding behind an outdated requirement. It's stronger now that I don't need it. Victoria's voice was calm, certain. My grandmother created that clause to protect me, but protection that requires dependence isn't really protection. It's control. A philosophical argument. Some board members prefer practical ones. Then give them practical arguments. The clause creates liability. It invites exactly the kind of manipulation Robert attempted. Removing it protects the company from future exploitation. Margaret nodded slowly. That might work, especially if you frame it as corporate governance reform rather than personal preference. Frame it however you want, as long as the clause disappears. Ethan watched Victoria work, marveling at the transformation since he'd first met her. The desperation that had driven their initial arrangement had evolved into something different, not softer exactly, but cleaner. She was still fierce, still strategic, still the most formidable person he'd ever encountered. But now those qualities served something beyond survival. They served purpose. "You're staring," Victoria said without looking up from her notes. "Admiring. There's a difference?" Staring implies rudeness. Admiring implies taste. Margaret laughed, the first time Ethan had heard her do so. "I like him," she told Victoria. "He humanizes you." That's a polite way of saying I needed humanizing. It's an honest way of saying you've changed. For the better, I think. Margaret gathered her papers. "The proposal will go before the full board on Thursday. Prepare for questions about your marriage's authenticity. Some members will suggest the timing is suspicious." The timing of what? Dissolving the clause now, after the marriage is publicly established and your position secure. Margaret's expression was sympathetic but frank. "They'll wonder if you're discarding a tool that's no longer useful." Let them wonder. The truth will be obvious to anyone willing to see it. Sometimes obvious truths require explicit statements. Victoria glanced at Ethan. "Then we'll make an explicit statement." The Thursday board meeting arrived with the kind of overcast sky that promised rain without delivering it. A fitting metaphor, Ethan thought, for the uncertainty ahead. He attended as Victoria's official consultant, a role that had become increasingly substantial over the months, sitting in the observers section while she presented her proposal. The marriage requirement in the family trust served its purpose in 1962, Victoria said, her voice carrying across the paneled boardroom. "My grandmother faced barriers that required creative solutions. But the world has changed, and our governance structures should change with it." She walked them through the legal analysis, the liability concerns, the precedent of similar amendments at other family-controlled companies. Her presentation was flawless, crisp, professional, compelling. But Ethan could see the tension in her shoulders, the careful control that masked her anxiety. "There's another reason I'm proposing this change," Victoria continued, departing from her prepared remarks. "A personal one, which I believe the board deserves to know." The room grew quiet. "When I married Ethan Brooks, I was desperate. Robert Chen had positioned himself to take everything my grandmother built, and the trust clause seemed like my only weapon. I found a man I could trust, made a practical arrangement, and hoped for the best." She paused, meeting Ethan's eyes across the room. "What I didn't expect was to fall in love, to discover that the partner I chose for strategic reasons would become the person I couldn't imagine living without. Our marriage began as an arrangement, yes, but it became something real, something I'm proud of." Murmurs rippled through the board members. "I'm proposing to dissolve the marriage clause because I don't want my relationship with my husband to carry the weight of corporate requirements. I want our marriage to exist on its own terms, for its own reasons, not because a 60-year-old document says it must." Victoria's voice was steady, unwavering. "If that makes some of you question my judgment, I understand. But I'd rather lead this company as a woman who made an honest choice than as someone hiding behind outdated protections." Silence followed her words. Then Margaret Wells rose. "I move to approve the amendment as proposed. Victoria has demonstrated her capability to lead this company, with or without marital requirements. It's time our governance reflected that reality." "Seconded," said James Whitmore, surprising everyone who remembered his earlier hesitations. The vote passed 14-2, an overwhelming endorsement that Victoria accepted with characteristic composure, though Ethan could see her hands trembling slightly as she gathered her papers. "That was brave," he told her afterward, in the privacy of her office. "That was terrifying." Victoria sank into her chair, the tension finally releasing. "I've never been that honest in a boardroom before." "How did it feel?" "Liberating and exhausting." She looked up at him with eyes that glistened. "I told a room full of corporate executives that I love my husband. That's not exactly standard governance protocol." "Maybe it should be." "Maybe. Victoria smiled, tired but genuine. We did it, Ethan. We're really free now. No clauses, no contingencies, no strategic requirements. Just us. Just us. She stood and crossed to where he waited, wrapping her arms around him with the desperate gratitude of someone who'd finally set down a burden carried too long. Thank you, she whispered against his chest. For everything. For being the person I needed. Even when I didn't know I needed you. You would have found a way without me. Maybe. But this way was better. They held each other in the quiet office, the city spread out beyond the windows, the weight of months lifting into something lighter. Outside, the threatened rain finally began to fall, gentle and cleansing, washing away the last traces of the world that had been. The news of the trust amendment spread quickly through business circles, generating the expected speculation and analysis. Most coverage was favorable, framing Victoria's decision as a progressive evolution of corporate governance. A few cynical voices suggested strategic manipulation, but they were drowned out by the overwhelming narrative of a CEO who'd chosen love over legacy requirements. Sandra Walsh, the reporter who'd written the surprisingly sympathetic profile months earlier, requested a follow-up interview. Victoria agreed, seeing an opportunity to control the narrative. When you dissolved the trust clause, what message were you hoping to send? Sandra asked, her recorder capturing every word. That women don't need outdated protections to lead effectively. That corporate governance should reflect modern values. And that, Victoria glanced at Ethan, who sat beside her during the interview, that love and strategy aren't mutually exclusive. Some critics suggest you're rewriting history, that the marriage was always about control, and dissolving the clause is just a way of obscuring that truth. The marriage started as a practical arrangement. I've never hidden that. Victoria's voice was calm, unapologetic. But practical arrangements can become genuine connections. Ethan and I chose each other under difficult circumstances, and then we chose each other again and again until the choosing became habit and the habit became home. Sandra turned to Ethan. Mr. Brooks, when you agreed to this marriage, did you ever imagine it would become what it is now? Ethan considered the question carefully. I imagined protecting my daughter from instability. I imagined doing something meaningful with my skills. I imagined helping someone who needed help. He paused. What I didn't imagine was finding a partner who would challenge me, support me, and make me believe that the best things in life are the ones you don't plan for. That's quite romantic for a financial analyst. Numbers aren't incompatible with romance. They're just a different way of understanding patterns, including the pattern of two people learning to fit together. Sandra smiled, and Ethan could see her reassessing her assumptions about him. One more question, she said. For both of you, where do you see this relationship in 5 years, 10 years? Victoria and Ethan looked at each other. I don't know, Victoria admitted. And for the first time in my life, that uncertainty doesn't frighten me, because whatever comes, we'll face it together. What she said, Ethan agreed, with possibly more invisible ducks. The article ran the following Sunday, titled Beyond the Arrangement, The Real Love Story Behind Hale Industries' Power Couple. It was generous and genuine, capturing something true about what they'd built together. Maya requested 3 copies, one for her room, one for her teacher, and one for Sir Quacksalot, who she insisted was very interested in current events. The holidays approached with the comfortable inevitability of seasons changing. The lakeside house transformed under Maya's enthusiastic direction, every surface acquiring decorations that ranged from elegant to enthusiastically homemade. Catherine indulged every request, having clearly decided that a house with a child in it should look appropriately festive. We need more lights, Maya announced during the first week of December. Sir Quacksalot says the ducks can't see the house from the lake at night. The ducks are probably sleeping at night, Ethan pointed out. Some ducks are adventurous, Daddy. They go on night quests. Night quests. To find magical acorns, obviously. Victoria appeared in the doorway, having overheard this exchange. If the ducks are on night quests, they definitely need more lights to find their way home. I'll have Catherine order another set. Maya beamed. Victoria understands duck culture. It's a gift. Ethan watched them together, his daughter and his wife, their bond having deepened over the months into something that resembled family without requiring explanation. Maya had stopped distinguishing between Victoria who reads stories and other Victorias. There was only one now, integrated into her world as naturally as breathing. And Victoria, for her part, had bloomed under Maya's unconditional affection. The woman who'd claimed she didn't know how to have a family was now mediating disputes between imaginary ducks, attending kindergarten performances with obvious pride, and allowing herself to be drawn into elaborate pretend games that would have horrified her younger, more controlled self. "I was thinking," Victoria said one evening after Maya was asleep, "about the holidays." "What about them?" "We should have people here. For a party. A real one, not a corporate event with caterers and an agenda." Ethan looked up from his book, surprised. "You want to host a party?" "I want to host a gathering. Friends, family, whatever family we have, people who matter." Victoria's expression was uncertain, vulnerable. "I've never done that before. My grandmother's parties were always strategic, but you've taught me that some things can be just enjoyable. A gathering sounds wonderful." "Really? Really? Who did you have in mind?" Victoria sat beside him, pulling her feet up onto the sofa. "Margaret Wells. She's been a genuine ally, and I'd like her to know this house is something other than a battlefield. Catherine and her family, she's worked here for 20 years, and I've never once invited her to sit at my table as a guest." She paused. "Maya's teacher, Mrs. Patterson, some of my executive team who've become actual friends over the years, and anyone from your life you'd want to include." Ethan thought about his own circles, smaller, quieter, the natural result of years spent focused on survival, and his daughter. "My colleague Janet, she covered for me during the early chaos, never asked questions. And maybe a few of the analysts I used to work with, the ones who actually care about the craft." Then we'll invite them all. A proper holiday gathering with food that isn't catered and conversations that aren't scheduled." "That sounds like a lot of work." "Catherine will handle the logistics. I'll handle the anxiety." Victoria smiled. "You'll handle making sure I don't retreat to my office when the social pressure gets overwhelming." "Deal." They planned the gathering over the following weeks, discovering a shared pleasure in creating something together that had no strategic purpose. The guest list grew organically, each edition sparking ideas for others. By the time invitations were sent, they'd assembled a surprisingly diverse group: corporate executives and kindergarten teachers, household staff, and financial analysts, united only by their connection to the family at the lakeside house. The night of the gathering, Maya appointed herself official greeter, standing at the door in her best purple dress to welcome each arrival with formal announcements. "Mrs. Patterson. She knows everything about art and has a cat named Cheeto. Very important person. Margaret Wells. She helped Victoria keep her company. Also very important. Janet from Daddy's old work. She brings good snacks to meetings." Ethan watched from the hallway, marveling at his daughter's confidence, her easy assumption that these people were there to celebrate something worth celebrating. The house filled with warmth and laughter, conversations spilling from room to room like water finding its level. Victoria moved through the gathering with a grace that surprised him. Not the controlled performance of corporate events, but something more genuine. She introduced people, made connections, ensured no one stood alone at the margins. "You're good at this," Ethan told her during a quiet moment in the kitchen. "I'm terrified at this." Victoria poured herself a glass of wine with slightly unsteady hands. "But the terror is manageable when the people are genuine. They are genuine. Look at them." Through the doorway, they could see Mrs. Patterson in animated conversation with Margaret Wells, the kindergarten teacher and the corporate powerhouse discovering unexpected common ground. Janet was teaching Maya and Catherine's grandchildren some kind of card game that seemed to involve a lot of cheering. The executive team members who'd arrived in suits had long since loosened their ties, absorbed into the easy atmosphere. "I've never had this," Victoria said quietly. "People who came because they wanted to, not because they felt obligated. You have it now. Because of you. Because you were willing to try. That's not nothing, Vicky." She leaned against him, her body relaxing into his familiar shape. "Sometimes I think about what would have happened if you'd said no. That night, when I asked you to marry me, you would have found another solution. Maybe. Or maybe I would have lost everything and discovered what that felt like." Victoria's voice was thoughtful rather than sad. part of me wishes I'd had to find out, to know I could survive the worst. You could survive anything. You're the strongest person I know. I'm strong because I have something worth protecting now. That's different from being strong alone. Maya burst into the kitchen before Ethan could respond, her eyes bright with excitement. Victoria, Mrs. Patterson says I should show everyone my duck drawings. Can we put them on the big screen in the living room? Absolutely. Let's give the people what they want. She let herself be pulled away by a 5-year-old's enthusiasm, and Ethan watched them go, his daughter and his wife, their hands linked, their laughter mingling with the warmth of a house full of people who cared. This was what love looked like when it stopped being strategic and started being simple. Not easy, nothing worth having was ever easy, but simple in the way that mattered. The choice to show up day after day for the people who needed you. He'd made that choice with Sarah years ago and made it again when she'd died, and Maya had needed him to survive his own grief. Now he was making it with Victoria, choosing her, choosing this life, choosing to believe that the best things really were the ones you didn't plan for. The gathering continued late into the evening, guests departing with warmth and promises to return. By midnight, only the core family remained. Ethan, Victoria, Maya asleep on the sofa wrapped in a blanket, and Catherine quietly tidying the kitchen while humming holiday songs. That was perfect, Victoria said, surveying the pleasant chaos of a successful party. Exhausting and terrifying and perfect. First of many, hopefully. First of many. She curled against him on the sofa, careful not to disturb Maya's sleep. Ethan? I need to tell you something I've been thinking about for a while. Her tone made him pause, attention sharpening. What is it? Victoria was quiet for a moment, gathering words. When my grandmother died, she left me a letter. I've never shown it to anyone, never even told anyone it existed. But there's a part of it I want to share with you. Okay. Victoria pulled out her phone, opened a document she must have photographed long ago. She wrote, Victoria, the company I built will demand everything from you. It will take your time, your energy, your peace of mind. Do not let it take your heart. Find someone who sees you, really sees you, and hold on to them with everything you have. The company will survive without you. You will not survive without love. Her voice caught on the last word. I didn't understand what she meant. For years I read those words and thought she was being sentimental. That success required sacrifice, and love was just another thing that could be used against me. And now I understand. Victoria looked at Maya's sleeping face, then at Ethan. She wasn't warning me about vulnerability. She was giving me permission to find what she never had time to find herself. Did she ever find it? I don't think so. She had partners, relationships, people who loved her, but she never let herself love them back. Not fully. Not the way I... Victoria stopped, starting again. Not the way I love you. Ethan pulled her closer, feeling the truth of her words settle into his bones. Your grandmother sounds like she was wise. She was, and lonely. I never realized how lonely until I experienced the opposite. Victoria's fingers found his, intertwining. I spent so long trying to be like her, strong, independent, needing no one. But that's not strength. That's just another kind of fear. What's real strength? This, letting yourself need someone, trusting them not to leave. Her voice was barely a whisper. Choosing to be vulnerable because the alternative, being safe but alone, isn't really living. Maya stirred in her sleep, murmuring something about ducks and stars. They watched her settle, this small person who'd become the center of both their worlds. She'll grow up without understanding how rare this is, Victoria said. Having two parents who chose each other, who built something real, she'll think this is normal. Maybe that's the point. Maybe we're teaching her that love can be normal, messy and complicated and absolutely ordinary in the best way. I like that. Victoria smiled, tired and genuine. Teaching her that love is ordinary. The most ordinary, extraordinary thing in the world. They stayed on the sofa until the fire burned low, watching their daughter dream of duck adventures and magical acorns. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, soft and silent, covering the world in possibility. Tomorrow would bring challenges, responsibilities. the endless demands of the company Eleanor Hale had built. But tonight, there was only this: a family in a house by the lake, learning that some walls were worth letting fall, and that the best fortresses were made not of stone and strategy, but of moments like these, small, precious, infinitely valuable. Ordinary love, building something extraordinary. Part 5. Lưu ý: viết 6.000 đến 6.500 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện. Pha hội thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liền mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch. Sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ, phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc. Kể theo ngôi thứ 3, giữ đồ kịch tính không Việt lan mạn, phần 5 giải quyết hết vấn đề và kết thúc trọn vẹn câu chuyện. Lưu ý trả lời trong mục tin nhắn không nhảy xanh document 15 giờ 40 phút. The winter deepened around the lakeside house, wrapping the property in a silence that felt less like isolation and more like protection. Ethan woke one January morning to find Victoria already dressed, standing at the bedroom window with an expression he couldn't read. The snow had fallen heavily overnight, blanketing the world in white, and the lake had frozen at the edges, something Maya had been anticipating with barely contained excitement for weeks. "You're up early," he said, sitting up against the headboard. "Couldn't sleep." Victoria didn't turn from the window. "I've been thinking." "About?" "The future. What it looks like. What we want it to be." Ethan rose and crossed to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. Through the glass, they could see the pristine landscape stretching toward the horizon, untouched, full of possibility. "That sounds serious for 6 in the morning." "It is serious." Victoria leaned back into his embrace, but her body remained tense. "The company is stable. Robert is in prison. The trust clause is dissolved. Everything I spent years fighting for is finally secure." "That's good, isn't it?" "It should be. But now that the fighting is over, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with myself." Her voice cracked slightly. "I've spent my entire adult life in crisis mode, defending, strategizing, preparing for the next attack. What happens when there's nothing left to defend against?" Ethan tightened his arms around her. "You live. You enjoy what you fought to protect." "I don't know how to do that." "Neither did I, after Sarah died. I spent a year just surviving, going through motions, doing what needed to be done. It took Maya finally laughing again to remind me that survival wasn't the same as living." Victoria turned in his arms, her dark eyes searching his face. "How did you learn the difference?" "I stopped waiting for permission, stopped treating happiness like something I needed to earn." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You've earned this, Vicky. The peace, the security, the chance to actually enjoy your life. You don't have to keep fighting to prove you deserve it." "But what if I don't know how to be anything other than a fighter?" "Then we figure it out together. That's what we do." She was quiet for a long moment, processing his words the way she processed everything, carefully, thoroughly, looking for flaws in the logic. "I want to travel," she said finally. "I've been to every major city in the world for business, but I've never actually seen any of them. Never walked through streets without an agenda, never sat in a cafe just because the view was beautiful. So we travel. I want Maya to see the world, not the sanitized version, the real one. Markets in Morocco, temples in Japan, villages in Italy where no one speaks English, and you have to communicate through gestures and goodwill." "She'd love that." "I want to write." Victoria's voice dropped, as if confessing something shameful. "My grandmother kept journals her entire life. I found them after she died. Decades of observations, thoughts, wisdom she never shared with anyone. I want to do that. Leave something behind that isn't just a company." "Then write." "And I want—" She stopped, her eyes glistening. "I want to stop being afraid. Of losing everything. Of trusting the wrong people. Of waking up one day and finding out this was all a dream." Ethan cupped her face in his hands. "This isn't a dream. I'm here. Maya's here. The life we built is real, and it's not going anywhere." "How can you be so certain?" "Because I chose it. Every day I choose it again." He kissed her forehead. And so do you, whether you realize it or not. Every morning you wake up in this house, every evening you come home to us. Every time you read Maya bedtime stories or argue with me about proper financial reporting methods, you're choosing this. You're choosing us. Victoria let out a breath that seemed to carry years of tension with it. I never chose anything before. Not really. I inherited responsibilities, made strategic decisions, responded to circumstances. But this, you and Maya and this life, this is the first thing I've ever actively chosen just because I wanted it. How does that feel? Terrifying. She smiled through her tears. And wonderful, and absolutely worth it. He kissed her then, not with desperation or strategy, but with the simple certainty of someone who had found exactly where he belonged. The day unfolded gently, as winter days often did in that house. Maya discovered the frozen lake edges with appropriate wonder, demanding that Sir Quaxalot and his family be informed of this magical development immediately. She spent an hour at the shore, narrating elaborate adventures to the ducks, who had wisely retreated to unfrozen waters, while Ethan and Victoria watched from the terrace with coffee cups warming their hands. She's going to be disappointed when the ice melts, Victoria observed. She'll find something else to be enchanted by. That's her gift. One of many. Victoria's expression softened as she watched Maya attempt to teach a confused duck about ice skating. I never thanked you properly, you know. For what? For sharing her with me. You didn't have to. When we started this arrangement, you could have kept her separate, protected her from the chaos of my world. Instead, you let her become part of it. She needed a family, a real one, not just the two of us circling each other in a small apartment. Ethan set down his coffee. And honestly, you needed her as much as she needed you. I didn't know I needed anything. That's usually when you need it most. Victoria was quiet for a moment, watching Maya slip on a patch of ice and immediately declare it the best thing that ever happened. There's something I want to ask you, she said. Something I've been thinking about for a while. Okay. I want to adopt her, officially, legally. Victoria turned to face him, her eyes fierce with something that looked like hope. I know I'm not her mother. I would never try to replace Sarah. But I love her, Ethan. She's my daughter in every way that matters, and I want the world to know it. The words hit Ethan somewhere deep, in the place where he kept his hopes for Maya's future. You want to be her legal parent. I want to be her parent, period. The legal part is just documentation. What if something happens to us? To our marriage? Victoria flinched but didn't look away. That's a fair question, and the honest answer is, it doesn't matter. Whatever happens between us, I will always love Maya. I will always be her parent. That's not conditional on our relationship surviving. You've thought about this. I've thought about nothing else for weeks. Victoria's voice was raw with vulnerability. I know how this sounds. The billionaire CEO wanting to adopt the convenient husband's child. But it's not about optics or strategy. It's about the fact that I can't imagine my life without her anymore. I don't want to imagine it. Ethan looked at his daughter, who had now convinced a duck to waddle toward her by offering imaginary treats. Sarah would have wanted this, he said quietly. She always worried about what would happen to Maya if something happened to me. Knowing there was someone else, someone who loved her unconditionally, would have meant everything. Is that a yes? That's a yes. He turned back to Victoria. But we ask Maya first. This is her decision too. Of course. I wouldn't do anything without her blessing. Then let's ask her. They called Maya in from the frozen lake, promising hot chocolate and an important conversation. She arrived with rosy cheeks and wet mittens, already narrating the adventures of Sir Quaxalot on ice before she'd fully entered the room. Maya, sweetheart, we need to talk to you about something, Ethan said, settling her onto the sofa between them. Am I in trouble? No, baby, just the opposite. He exchanged a glance with Victoria. You know how I'm your daddy and how Mommy Sarah is in heaven watching over you? Maya nodded solemnly. Well, Victoria has been wondering, and I've been thinking about it too, whether you might like her to be another kind of parent. Not replacing Mommy, but being something extra. Someone who would take care of you officially, legally, forever. Maya's brow furrowed with concentration. Like a second mommy? Like whatever you want to call it. Victoria's voice was careful, gentle. I love you very much, Maya. I want to be part of your family in every way possible, but only if that's what you want too. Maya was quiet for a long moment, longer than Ethan had ever seen her stay silent on any subject. Would I call you Mommy? You could call me whatever feels right. Victoria, Mom, something entirely different. Whatever makes you comfortable. Would you still read me stories? Every single night. Would you still talk to Sir Quacks-a-Lot, even when he's being difficult? Especially when he's being difficult. Maya considered this with the gravity of a diplomat negotiating peace treaties. Okay, she said finally. I think that would be nice. Really? Really? Maya's face broke into a grin. Mrs. Patterson says families come in all shapes and sizes, and I think our shape is very interesting. We have a daddy and a Victoria and ducks and a big house, and now Victoria can be my official person. Your official person? The person who takes care of me when Daddy is busy being brave at work. Maya nodded as if this settled everything. Can I have my hot chocolate now? They made hot chocolate with extra marshmallows, and Maya declared it the best hot chocolate in the history of hot chocolate, and Victoria cried quietly in the kitchen while Ethan pretended not to notice. Later, when Maya was napping and the house was quiet, they began the paperwork. The adoption process took 3 months, faster than typical, facilitated by lawyers who understood the situation and a family court judge who saw what was obvious to everyone involved. Maya approached each appointment with enthusiasm, explaining to court officers and social workers about duck etiquette and the importance of imaginary friends. She's charming them, Ethan observed after one particularly successful interview. She's actually charming family court officials. She's being herself. That's more powerful than any strategy. The final hearing was held on a Tuesday in early April, when the snow had melted and the lake was alive again with returning birds. Sir Quacks-a-Lot had been spotted leading his family back to their summer residence, which Maya took as a very good omen. The courtroom was smaller than Ethan expected, more intimate. The judge was an older woman with kind eyes and the practiced patience of someone who'd seen every configuration of family imaginable. Maya Brooks, the judge said, do you understand what's happening today? Maya stood straight and serious in her best dress. Victoria is becoming my official parent. That means she's responsible for me forever, even when I'm being difficult. And you want this? Yes, please. Maya paused. Also, can I ask a question? Of course. Will Victoria's name go on my birth certificate? Because that seems like an important document, and it should be accurate. The judge smiled. We can arrange an amended certificate, yes. Victoria Hale Brooks will be listed as your adoptive mother. Hale Brooks? Victoria looked surprised. She'd never discussed the hyphenation. Standard practice for adoptive parents in married couples. The judge's eyes twinkled. Unless you prefer something different? No. Hale Brooks is perfect. The formalities continued. Signatures and declarations and the legal machinery that transformed intention into fact. By the time they left the courthouse, Maya Victoria Brooks had 2 parents in the eyes of the law. And Victoria Hale had something she'd never expected to have, a daughter. They celebrated with ice cream, at Maya's insistence, followed by a trip to the lake to inform Sir Quacks-a-Lot of the new family configuration. He says congratulations, Maya reported after a lengthy one-sided conversation. And he wants to know if this means more breadcrumbs. It means more everything, Victoria said, and her voice cracked on the word. Spring surrendered to summer, and the lakeside house blossomed. Victoria had begun keeping a journal as she'd wanted, first hesitantly, then with increasing confidence. She wrote about the company, about Eleanor's legacy, about the strange path that had led her from desperate CEO to wife to mother. The pages filled with observations and reflections, the beginning of something that would outlast boardrooms and balance sheets. Ethan discovered a love of gardening he'd never known he possessed, expanding the small vegetable plot into an elaborate arrangement of herbs and flowers that Catherine praised and Maya considered an excellent location for fairy investigations. And Maya, now 6 years old and increasingly certain of her place in the world, had started first grade at Lakeside Academy with the confidence of someone who knew exactly who she was and who she belonged to. "I have two parents," she announced on the first day, introducing Victoria to her new teacher. "This is my mom. She runs a very big company and she knows everything about ducks." "I don't know everything about ducks," Victoria protested. "You know more than most grown-ups. That counts." The summer brought other changes too. Margaret Wells retired from the board, leaving a legacy of governance reform that Victoria intended to honor. The Eastern European division had been fully restructured, its operations rebuilt on foundations of transparency and accountability. And the company that Eleanor Hale had built from nothing was stronger than it had ever been. Not despite the crisis that had nearly destroyed it, but because of what that crisis had revealed. "We're better now," Victoria told Ethan one evening, reviewing the latest quarterly reports. "More ethical, more sustainable, more what my grandmother actually wanted." Sometimes you have to break things before you can fix them properly. "That's surprisingly philosophical for a numbers guy." "Maya's rubbing off on me. She says Mr. Quackers is very philosophical." Victoria laughed, a sound that had become as natural as breathing, as ordinary as sunrise. "Our daughter is something else." "Our daughter," Ethan savored the words. "I like how that sounds." "So do I." They'd settled into a rhythm that felt less like routine and more like ritual. Morning coffee on the terrace, evening walks around the property, weekend adventures that took them from hiking trails to museums, to the kind of small discoveries that made childhood magical. Victoria had learned to leave work at the office, mostly. Ethan had learned to let himself relax into stability. And together, they'd created something that neither had expected, a life that was genuinely good. The first anniversary of their marriage arrived in October, marked by the changing leaves and Maya's insistence that the occasion required a party. "Not a big party," she clarified, "a family party, with cake and presents and ducks." Ducks at a party? Sir Quacksalot would be very hurt if he wasn't invited. So they had a family party, just the three of them, with cake Maya had helped bake and presents that were more thoughtful than expensive. Ethan gave Victoria a leather-bound journal with her initials embossed on the cover. Victoria gave Ethan a first edition of a financial analysis textbook he'd mentioned admiring, signed by the author, and Maya gave them both drawings of their family, Daddy, Victoria, herself, and an elaborate arrangement of ducks in formal attire. "They're wearing bow ties because it's a special occasion," she explained. "Obviously," Victoria agreed. They ate cake by the lake as the sun set, watching the light play across the water while Maya narrated the ducks' supposed commentary on the celebration. "Sir Quacksalot says you're a good team," she reported. "He says most humans don't know how to work together, but you figured it out." "Did he really say that?" Ethan asked. "He said quack, 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 but that's what he meant." Maya considered her cake with great seriousness. "Daddy? Victoria? Yes, sweetheart? Thank you for being my parents." Maya's voice was small but certain. "I know I got lucky. Some kids don't have anyone, and I have two people who love me very much. That's special." Victoria's eyes glistened. Ethan had to clear his throat before he could respond. "We're the lucky ones, baby girl. You're the best thing that ever happened to either of us." "That's true," Victoria agreed, "though you shouldn't let it go to your head." "Too late," Maya grinned. "I'm already very aware of my specialness." And humble about it, clearly. They laughed together, three people who had found each other through circumstances none of them would have chosen, and built something worth keeping from the wreckage. The year that followed was perhaps the happiest of Ethan's life. Not because nothing went wrong, things always went wrong, but because the wrongness was manageable. Problems became puzzles rather than crises. Challenges became opportunities rather than threats. The foundations they'd built proved strong enough to weather whatever storms arrived. Victoria celebrated her 41st birthday with a small gathering at the house, a far cry from the desperate party where she'd first proposed their arrangement. This time, the guests were genuine friends. The atmosphere was warm, and the only agenda was celebration. "1 year ago, I asked a man I barely knew to marry me," Victoria said during her toast. "It was the most reckless thing I'd ever done. Also the smartest. Also the most romantic," Margaret Wells added, "in a corporate sort of way." "There's nothing wrong with corporate romance," Ethan protested. "Numbers can be very passionate." That's what I love about him, Victoria smiled. He finds passion in spreadsheets. There's a metaphor in there somewhere, Margaret observed. Please don't find it. They laughed, and the evening continued with the easy warmth of people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Maya performed an elaborate dance routine she'd choreographed for the occasion, involving several invisible duck backup dancers. Catherine's grandchildren served as enthusiastic audience members. And somewhere in the middle of the chaos, Ethan found himself looking around the room and feeling something he hadn't expected: contentment. Not happiness exactly, though there was plenty of that, but something deeper. The sense that he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. You're thinking too hard, Victoria murmured, appearing beside him. I can see the gears turning. I'm thinking about how different this is from a year ago, from 2 years ago, from before any of this started. Good different. The best different. He took her hand. I spent so long just surviving, after Sarah during the early years with Maya. I forgot what it felt like to actually want things, to have hopes instead of just goals. And now? Now I want everything. More time with you, more years watching Maya grow up, more mornings on the terrace and evenings by the lake, and ordinary days that add up to an extraordinary life. Victoria squeezed his hand. That's a lot of wanting. I can handle it. Can you? I can try. Her smile was soft, genuine. I spent so long protecting myself from disappointment that I forgot how to hope too. But you've taught me that some risks are worth taking. The big ones especially. The biggest ones. She kissed him softly. Thank you, Ethan, for all of it. Thank you for asking me to marry you, even if you were desperate and calculating and slightly terrifying. I prefer strategic and compelling. Terrifying and wonderful. I'll accept that. Maya appeared between them, demanding attention with the imperious confidence of a 6-year-old who knew she was adored. The ducks want to know when there's going to be more cake. The ducks have already had cake, Victoria pointed out. They have high metabolisms. It's a duck thing. We should probably address this duck thing, Ethan said gravely. It sounds medically significant. Very medically significant, Maya agreed. Also, I love you both very much. That's not related to the cake thing, I just wanted to say it. We love you too, sweetheart. I know. That's why I'm so confident about the cake. They got more cake. The ducks, invisible and otherwise, were satisfied. And the party continued into the evening, full of laughter and warmth, and the particular joy of people who had found their place in the world. The second winter came gently, blanketing the lake in quiet white. Ethan found Victoria in the study one December morning, surrounded by papers and the leather journal he'd given her, her expression thoughtful. Working on something? Finishing something, actually. She looked up, her eyes bright. My first journal is full. I was just reading through it, remembering everything that happened this year. Good memories? The best. Victoria set down her pen. But I was also thinking about the future, about what comes next. And what does come next? I don't know. That's what I was trying to figure out. She stood, moving to the window where the snow was falling in soft, endless curtains. The company is stable. Maya is thriving. Our marriage is everything I never knew I wanted. For the first time in my life, I don't have a 5-year plan. That sounds liberating. It's terrifying. Victoria laughed at herself. I've always needed a plan, a goal, something to work toward. But now you get to figure out what you actually want. Not what you need, not what's strategic. What you want. She was quiet for a long moment. I want more children. The words hung in the air, unexpected and vulnerable. What? I want more children, Victoria repeated, turning to face him. I never thought I'd say that. I spent my whole life believing I wasn't cut out for motherhood. Too busy, too driven, too focused on the company. But Maya changed everything. Loving her changed everything. And now I want more of that. More chaos, more laughter, more bedtime stories and imaginary ducks. Ethan's heart pounded. You want to have a baby? I want to try. If you're willing. Victoria's voice wavered. I know it's complicated, my age, my work, all the practicalities. But I've spent my whole life being practical. and it almost cost me everything that matters. So for once, I want to be impractical. I want to want something just because I want it. Vicky, you don't have to decide now. It's a big thing to ask, and I know Maya took a lot out of you as a single parent. I wouldn't expect you to do most of the work this time. I'd be there, really there, as much as humanly possible. But if you don't want more children, if you're done with that part of your life, I understand. I just needed to tell you what I... Ethan crossed the room and kissed her, silencing the flood of words. Yes, he said when they parted. Yes, what? Yes, I want more children with you. Yes, I want more chaos and laughter and bedtime stories. Yes to all of it. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. Really? Really? I never let myself imagine it after Sarah died, being a father again, building a bigger family. It felt greedy somehow, like asking for more than I deserved. But you've taught me that deserving isn't the point. The point is wanting something enough to fight for it. I learned that from you. Then we've taught each other. He pulled her close. Let's make more family, Vicky. Let's fill this house with so many children that Sir Quacksalot runs out of names for all of them. She laughed through her tears. Maya will be thrilled. Maya will demand to be involved in every decision. We'll never have a moment's peace. I can't wait. They told Maya that evening during their usual routine of dinner and conversation and the comfortable chaos of family life. Her reaction was predictably enthusiastic. A baby? A real baby? For me to be a big sister to? That's the general idea, Ethan confirmed. Oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. Maya bounced in her chair. This is the best news ever. Better than the frozen lake, better than purple paint, better than when Sir Quacksalot had ducklings. We haven't actually made a baby yet, Victoria cautioned. It might take some time. That's okay. I can wait. I'm very patient. Since when? Ethan asked. Since now. This is too important to be impatient about. Maya's expression turned serious. Will the baby be mine? Like, really mine? My actual sibling? Your actual sibling, Victoria confirmed. Part of our family, just like you. And you'll love them as much as you love me? We'll love them differently, because they'll be a different person. But yes, just as much. Maya considered this with the gravity the subject deserved. Okay, she said finally. I accept this plan, but I have conditions. Conditions? The baby has to like ducks. That's non-negotiable. We'll do our best to ensure duck appreciation. And I get to pick the middle name. That might require discussion. Maya Victoria Brooks picked a wonderful middle name for their sibling. The end. Those are my conditions. Ethan looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at Ethan. They both looked at their daughter, who had somehow become a tiny negotiator with very specific demands. We'll take it under advisement, Victoria said diplomatically. That means yes, Maya informed her. I'm learning corporate language. The months that followed were filled with hope and patience, and the particular anxiety of wanting something you couldn't control. Victoria continued working, but with boundaries she'd never allowed herself before. Ethan continued his consulting role, his analysis increasingly valued throughout the company, and Maya continued being Maya, extraordinary in her ordinariness, magical in her mundane. The news came on a spring morning when the lake was alive with returning birds, and Maya was already outside cataloging Sir Quacksalot's new family additions. Victoria held the pregnancy test with trembling hands. It's positive. Ethan stared at the small plastic indicator, at the two lines that represented an entire future. It's positive, he repeated. We're going to have a baby. We're going to have a baby. They stood in the bathroom of their lakeside home, surrounded by the ordinary details of a life they'd built together, and let the enormity of the moment wash over them. I'm scared, Victoria admitted. I'm 41. There are risks. Things could go wrong. Things could go wrong, Ethan agreed, but things could also go right, and we've survived worse odds than this. We have, haven't we? Corporate conspiracies, hostile takeovers, tabloid journalists, invisible ducks. He cupped her face in his hands. Whatever comes, we face it together. That's the deal. That's the deal, she echoed. They told Maya after school, warning her that the baby was still very small and they needed to be careful about getting too excited too soon. Maya ignored this entirely. "I'm going to be a big sister," she announced to Sir Quacksalot, to Catherine, to her teacher, to approximately every human and duck within a 5-mile radius. "The baby is going to be the luckiest baby in the world, because they have me." "So much for keeping it quiet," Ethan observed. "Did you really think she would?" Victoria smiled. "She's your daughter. Subtlety isn't in her nature." "She's our daughter, and no, I suppose it isn't." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, defying statistical anxieties and medical concerns. Victoria adapted her schedule to accommodate rest without abandoning her responsibilities. The company continued to thrive, and Maya took her role as future big sister with a seriousness that bordered on comical. "The baby needs to hear my voice," she explained, pressing her face against Victoria's growing belly, "so they know who I am when they come out. Otherwise, they might be confused." "What are you telling them?" "Important things, like which ducks are friendly and which ones have attitudes. It's crucial information." "I'm sure they appreciate it. They're very smart, I can tell." The due date was set for late November, almost exactly 2 years after Victoria had first proposed their arrangement. The symmetry wasn't lost on either of them. 2 years, Victoria mused one evening, watching the autumn leaves fall past the window. "It feels like a lifetime." "It feels like a beginning," Ethan countered. "Everything that came before was just preparation for what we're building now." "You really believe that?" "I really do. Sarah used to say that life doesn't waste pain, that everything hard teaches us something we'll need later. I didn't believe her for a long time after she died, but now—" He looked at Victoria, at her rounded belly, at the life they'd created together. "Now I understand what she meant. I wish I could have met her." "She would have liked you. You're both fierce in the same way, protective of what matters, unwilling to compromise on the important things." High praise. Accurate praise. Ethan pulled her close, careful of her belly. "You've given me something I never thought I'd have again, Vicky. A partner, a future, the chance to believe that the best parts of life aren't behind me." "You've given me something too." Victoria's voice was thick. "The permission to want, to need, to stop pretending that strength means standing alone." "It never did." "I know that now." They held each other as the light faded and their baby moved between them. A small person who would be born into a family that had chosen each other, that had built itself from crisis and circumstance into something worth keeping. The delivery came on a Tuesday in late November, at a hospital that had been prepared for weeks, surrounded by staff who understood both the medical and personal significance of the occasion. Ethan held Victoria's hand through the entire process, coaching her breathing, absorbing her fear, being present in the way partners are present when it matters most. And at 3:47 in the morning, Eleanor Sarah Brooks entered the world, screaming, healthy, absolutely perfect. "Eleanor," Victoria whispered, holding her daughter for the first time. "For my grandmother." "Sarah," Ethan added, his voice cracking. "For her mother." "Eleanor Sarah, it's beautiful." "She's beautiful." They called Maya at dawn, Catherine having agreed to bring her to the hospital once the baby arrived safely. Maya burst into the room with the energy of a small hurricane, immediately demanding to see her sister. "She's so tiny," Maya exclaimed, peering at Eleanor with wide eyes. "She's smaller than Sir Quacksalot. Well, maybe the same size, but still very tiny." "She'll get bigger," Victoria promised. "I know. That's what babies do." Maya's expression turned serious. "Hi, Eleanor. I'm Maya. I'm your big sister. I've been talking to you through Victoria's belly for months, so you probably recognize my voice. Welcome to our family." Eleanor, all of 4 hours old, made a small noise that might have been acknowledgement. "She said hi back," Maya declared. We're already best friends." Ethan watched his daughters, both of them, the one he'd raised alone and the one they'd made together, and felt something break open in his chest. Not pain, but its opposite, joy so intense it felt like drowning. "Thank you," he told Victoria, unable to find better words. "For all of it. For asking me to marry you, for loving Maya, for wanting this family we're becoming. Thank you." "Thank you for saying yes." Victoria's eyes were wet. for showing up that night with your quarterly report and your sensible car and your willingness to believe in something impossible. Thank you for choosing us. I'd choose you again, every time, forever. Forever, she echoed. I like the sound of that. The days that followed were a blur of feedings and sleepless nights and the particular chaos of newborn parenthood. Maya proved to be an excellent big sister, helpful without being intrusive, gentle without being asked, endlessly patient with a baby who couldn't do anything interesting yet. She'll play with me eventually, Maya explained philosophically. I just have to wait until she's old enough to understand duck protocol. That seems reasonable, Ethan agreed. I'm a reasonable person. The lakeside house, already transformed once by their family's growth, transformed again. Baby supplies appeared in every room. Catherine added extra staff to help with the increased household demands. And the rhythm of their days adjusted to accommodate a new person who needed everything and gave everything in return. Victoria returned to work gradually, having arranged a transition that protected both the company and her family. Ethan took on primary childcare during her office hours, discovering that he loved this role. The quiet afternoons with Eleanor, the school pickups with Maya, the sense of being needed in ways that mattered. You've become a house husband, Victoria observed one evening, watching him expertly manage dinner preparation while bouncing Eleanor on his hip. A consulting house husband, he corrected. I still do financial analysis, just between diaper changes. I love that about you. The diaper changes? The way you've built a life that includes everything. Work you care about, family you love. No compromise, no separation, just integration. I learned from the best. Flatterer. Accurate observer. They'd found their balance somehow. The billionaire CEO and the house husband who analyzed her company's numbers. The little girl who talked to ducks, and the baby who would grow up never knowing a world without an extended, complicated, perfectly imperfect family. It wasn't the life either of them had planned. It was something better. Years would pass. Eleanor would grow into a child as different from Maya as two sisters could be. Quieter, more contemplative, with a love of books that matched her grandmother's and a stubbornness that came from both her parents. Maya would become a teenager, then a young woman, carrying the lessons of her childhood into a future bright with possibility. The company would continue to thrive under Victoria's leadership, eventually transitioning to a new generation that would carry Eleanor's name. And through it all, Ethan and Victoria would remain what they'd become, that desperate night when she'd asked him to marry her. And he'd said yes, partners, parents, two people who had found each other in the wreckage of circumstance and built something worth keeping. But those years were still ahead. For now, in the lakeside house that had become their home, a family gathered around a dinner table as the first snow of winter began to fall. I'd like to make a toast, Victoria said, raising her glass. We're having toasts now? Maya asked. At regular dinner? This isn't regular dinner. This is our first dinner as a complete family. Oh, Maya considered this. Then yes, toasts are appropriate. Proceed. Thank you for permission. Victoria smiled. I want to toast to unexpected gifts, to the things we find when we're looking for something else entirely, to a man who showed up with a quarterly report and stayed to change everything. Her eyes found Ethan's. And to whatever comes next, because as long as we face it together, I know it will be worth it. Hear, hear, Ethan said, raising his own glass. Can I add something? Maya asked. Of course. Maya stood small and serious and absolutely certain of her place in the world. I want to toast to our family. We're not like other families because we chose each other instead of just being born together. That makes us special. Sir Quacksalot agrees. Does he? Victoria asked. He does. He says families that choose each other stick together through everything. Maya raised her juice glass. To choosing each other. Every day. Forever. To choosing each other, Ethan echoed. To choosing each other, Victoria agreed. Eleanor, too young to understand but somehow present in the moment, made a small sound that might have been agreement. And outside the windows, the snow continued to fall, gentle and endless, covering the world in possibility, promising that whatever came next would be faced together, by a family that had found each other against all odds and held on with everything they had, not because they needed to, because they wanted to, And that, in the end, was the only reason that mattered.